Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Irish Breakdown Podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Happy Thursday, almost the end of the week. Have a fun and loaded show coming your guys' way today. First and foremost, we're talking about the major recruiting weekend that Notre Dame is getting ready to host. A lot of big name players in the 2027 class are going to be in South Bend. We're going to preview that weekend, talk about where things stand with some guys, talk about some guys next week that are also going to be on campus, and then talk about some ideal results. Then we're continuing with our recruiting class, kind of 2024 preview, 2026 preview of the 2024 recruiting class. Earlier this week, we talked about the senior class and the 23 class and how they were coming out of high school. And now we're talking switching gears to the 24 class, which will be a really fun discussion. We're also previewing Rice today and then wrapping everything up with a mailbag, man. So, Brian, this is going to be a really fun show.
Yeah, it is. I mean, you talk about this 24 class. It goes back to really what's at the heart of it, Trev, is kind of looking back and be like, okay, we hammered the recruiting services in the first 2 years of Marcus Freeman's tenure. Hammered them constantly on our show. But how we felt they were getting it wrong. So we're looking back and saying, okay, hey, did they get it right? Did they get it wrong? What did they get right? What did they get wrong? And how can you have a bunch of recruiting classes that barely make the top 10 and some don't make the top 10? And yet this team is one of the most talented in the country, and they only bring in 6 to 8 transfer portal guys a year, including kickers. So clearly they missed. And it's sort of that conversation. And because I still think there's even some Notre Dame fans that still don't quite understand how good this team is, because there are people that just allow the recruiting rankings to honestly explain away their entire view of a team's roster. Like, we got to really be careful about that team. Like, no, you really don't. Not really. I mean, as this team gets older and better, you say, well, what about, 2024? Okay. The two classes we're talking about were freshmen and sophomores on that team. They were not the drivers of that team. They are now. And that's why we've seen the talent level for this team rise every single year as the Marcus Freeman classes continue to get older and continue to litter the depth chart. We did a breakdown the other day, Trev, where we talked about, the 23 recruiting class, which was Marcus Freeman's first full recruiting class. And we looked at the number of starters that were in that class. And then we're going to talk about this class, the 24 class. And there aren't quite as many starters in it. But when you add his first two classes together, this will be without a doubt the most starters that Notre Dame has had from those two classes.
Yep.
And we're just, when we say classes, we're not referring to, like, we don't count Francis Brew as part of this class. We would from a bigger picture evaluation of the junior class at Notre Dame, but he obviously didn't sign with Notre Dame out of high school. And that will be our focus, is that right there, as we continue to inch closer and closer to the season. And I think it also is good to see, because you want to understand why certain people rank guys as certain places. And why there are certain, networks or magazines that still don't respect Notre Dame's individual players, even though they clearly recognize the team as dominant. It's this right here, because there are still so many people that will look back and say, well, Notre Dame's blue chip ratio is insert reason. Well, this class is a perfect example, Trev, because when you look at the quote unquote blue chip ratio, which I think is basically like 4-star and above, if you look at the 2024 recruiting class, 24/7 had Notre Dame having more 3-stars than they did 4 or 1, and it was pretty close with on 3. They had 13 4 and 5 stars only in 10 3-stars. ESPN was 13 4-stars, 10 3-stars. And you say, okay, that's why. One of the 3-stars by each of those 3 outlets, for example, was Leonard Moore. You look at on 3, one of their 3-stars, Tay Johnson. And then it starts to make sense. And so, yeah, you can look at blue chip ratio all you want, but when you're still doing that based off of recruiting classes, you're going to miss the mark. Because if you're going to look at that, then we have to then say, okay, Tay Johnson and Leonard Moore are not blue chips. I mean, they're both going to be first-round draft picks, but they're not blue chips. And that's where you kind of lose it. And it's not just Notre Dame. We talk a lot about Miami here because that's going to be the big team Notre Dame plays this year. And we've got some Miami fans in the chat. But, I mean, are we still going to pretend that Malachi Toney wasn't a top 50, player nationally, even though that's exactly where he was from a recruiting ranking standpoint? You know what I mean? Like you look at Malachi Tony, he was a 3-star on Rivals, a 3-star on ESPN, Rivals on 3, or 3-star on Rivals ESPN, 3-star on ESPN, 3-star on 247. He was ranked outside the top 50 at wide receiver. So if I'm doing a blue chip ratio, am I going to pretend like that's still the case? Am I going to still pretend that Leonard Moore was not even considered a top 50 player in the state of Texas by On3? But when you look at certain people that do evaluations of a roster, they still hold on to that. And that's where I say, like, we have to be able to look at this and say, hey, once they get to college, what they were ranked no longer matters. And I think this class is a perfect example of that.
Yeah, 100%. Blue chips didn't really matter last year in the Rose Bowl. I'll tell you that much. That is for sure. That's all we heard. All we heard leading up to that. I mean, yeah, Kurt Cignetti's got this team firing on all cylinders, but look at the blue chip ratio. Look at the 5 stars. Very, very excited to dive into that conversation, man. I'm with you. But before we get to that 2024 class, man, there's a big recruiting class and big recruiting weekend happening this weekend. And man, it's going to be a loaded week. It's a small group, but it's very, very important. A lot of heavy hitters in the 2027 class, man.
There is. And look, it's interesting. There's always, perception is really a wild thing in recruiting. And you want to know one of the reasons we don't cover recruiting as much as we used to? There's a lot of reasons for it. And, it's harder to get a hold of kids. Some kids want to get paid now to come on a show. Some kids want to, go through my agent. I'm not going through your freaking agent. You know what I mean? Like there's just the ups and downs, the decommitting, it's just gotten to the point where I don't enjoy recruiting as much anymore. It doesn't really matter what I think about what a kid will or won't do. We're going to find out. And then honestly, I get tired of responding to the clickbait stuff all the time. It's like, look, I'm just not even going to get into it. I got a buddy of mine. He's like, what do you think about this? I was like, buddy, you called me 3 days ago and asked me these same questions. And all you're doing is responding to some BS clickbait article or clickbait article. And so there was this thread in the board like, hey, has Notre Dame lost recruiting momentum? And I'm like, well, what are you basing it on? Well, we haven't had a commitment since, 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks when Jackson Vaughn committed. And I was like, that last year Notre Dame had a commitment on May 14th and did not get another commitment till June 18th. Last year at this time, Notre Dame had 16 kids committed out of a 30-man class that finished ranked number 1 by On3. Maybe we just take a breath and realize that recruiting isn't every third day you're going to get a kid, because eventually you're going to not have enough room for anybody else. They're doing pretty good here. And so they're in a great place right now. But here's the but, right? I don't care that they haven't gotten anybody in the last couple of weeks. We didn't expect them to get anybody publicly in the last couple of weeks. But here's the deal. If this class is going to finish the way that last year's did, be a top 3 to 5 class, the finish that they have over the next 2 weeks in these recruiting weekends is going to go a very long way towards determining that. And you've had great success up until now, but if you kind of limp here, to the stretch, you're not going to finish with the kind of class that you hoped that you were going to have. If you do finish as strong this year as you did last year, then once again, Notre Dame is going to have a class that is among the top 3 to 5 in the country. I don't know where it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That doesn't matter to me. Do you meet all your needs? There's a couple other teams putting together excellent classes that could end up being ranked higher than Notre Dame. But the point is going to be, this is another gap closing class. This is another needle moving class. But it's all going to be about the finish. And unlike last year, I think there are more kids that they've got to come from behind on than what I thought was true last year. And that's all going to be determined by how these visits go. So we're going to talk about, obviously, the guys that are on campus this weekend. Then there's a couple midweek visitors next week that we're going to also talk a little bit about. So this begins a very important 2 weeks. That how well the next 2 weeks go is going to go a long way. Not even, Trev. It's really a week and a half is going to determine how good this class is. It's going to be a top 10 class, in my opinion. I don't doubt that. But is it 8 to 10 is a whole lot different than 2 to 4. It's good either way, but one is pretty good, one is great or elite. And then there's obviously room in between. And where you are is going to be determined by how well these visits go the next couple of weeks. This weekend is going to be a little bit of a smaller, but focused on certain positions. Next weekend's is going to be the much bigger one And, we'll get into that as well, but it's going to be a fun couple of weeks. That is for sure.
Closing is going to be the name of the game for Notre Dame over the next week and a half. And I'm very interested to see how they dive into everything, man. Like I said, very big, heavy hitters, big literally and figuratively, that are going to be on campus. It's very front seven focused, along with some of the top targets. I know David Folorunshue is going to be on campus, and then Sean Kraft, two guys who are already committed to the 2027 class. And hopefully they can also play a role in getting some of these big name guys in. And now, before we kind of dive into where Notre Dame stands with some of these guys, this is like the weekend that starts official visits, correct? Like these are now the official scheduled visits that they had from spring, like the ones that they had set up in the spring, correct?
Say that again.
These are like the official visits, like the middle of June official visits that we were talking about back in spring, correct? That they got scheduled
this is
from
the
those visits.
Okay. Yep, exactly. This is, you needed to have success then. And that's a great point. Like we said back then, how well you did those weekends is going to determine whether you could get these kids on campus. Now, this is more looking forward to next weekend, but for like take Hayden Henderson, for example, who visits next weekend, Albert Simeon, who visits next weekend. The point being, you needed to crush those visits, just do great on those visits to ensure that these young men would then come back for visits. Coming into the April visit, Caden Henderson did not have an official visit set up with Notre Dame, and it wasn't a given that he was going to make one. Visit goes great, immediately sets up an official visit. Now you're in the game. So absolutely, Trev. Yes, you were correct. I was on my official visits in the spring. I didn't hear that correctly. Getting old, brother. But yes, it was that period then leads to, it's the building blocks, right? Get that early interest, get on the road, then get kids up in campus for spring, do well in spring. Then you get these kids on campus for the summer. Some of them you got to commit, right? I don't know that the game plan for Lathan Wisington was, hey, let's get him to commit. It was more, let's crush this visit because we love this kid. And then maybe we can get him on campus for an official. And then sometimes if it really goes well, you get a kid to commit. But for a lot of the top guys that we're talking about, it was, we got to make sure that we put ourselves in position to really do a great job in that final stretch leading into the officials. And that's what they've done. Now it's okay. You did that. You got these kids on campus. Now let's see if you can close. Last year they closed like crazy.
Heck yeah.
Well, it's a different staff now. It's a different class. It's different kids. It's different needs. It's different, there's a lot that's different about it, but we're going to find out if they can close as well as they did last year.
Let's talk about some of the players that they have to close on, Brian, and we'll talk about where things stand. Some of the names are going to be very familiar to you all, and one of them is defensive end Abraham Cisse. It's been a hot topic of conversation here on the Irish Breakdown channel. We are both extremely, extremely high on Cisse as one of the top defensive ends in the 2027 class. Brian, where do things stand with him?
Like, this is a big one, Trev. I mean, obviously, Notre Dame has been doing a great job with Abraham Cisse in this recruitment. It's really an interesting backstory. I talked a little bit about it last night as we were kind of going through, doing a little bit of a preview on Sean's show. And this is one of those ones where the recruiting cycle has been very interesting for Charlie Partridge, in that, with the exception of Jackson Vaughn, a lot of the kids that Notre Dame was in a great place with before he got here, they've struggled with a little bit since he got here, because I think there was it was much more of a negative that Al Washington left for the kids that had been here for a while. And it, not so much when you go through and you're talking about some of the guys that maybe weren't on the board yet, where Aiden O'Neal, they weren't really recruiting Aiden O'Neal. I think we could argue that was probably a mistake. They weren't really recruiting David Folorunshue heavily. I think we can admit that was a mistake. There was a lot of that where you say, okay, well, hey, we're the new staff. We can't control what the previous staff did. I'm just telling you that you're our guy. We like you. You're a guy that we want. And so, like, with those guys, you look at Aiden O'Neal, you look at David Folorunshue, guys like that, Notre Dame has been able to do a great job with and able to land. And Abraham Cisse is in that category. He was not a guy that they were really pushing hard for when Charlie Partridge arrived. But what's funny is when Charlie Partridge arrived, it was you had to kind of reevaluate the board. Right? Like, okay, yeah, I know that these guys are high on, but let's make sure that I like these guys and that I want these guys, because that's the time to do it. If you don't like a kid, you don't recruit him for 3 months and then decide down the road, hey, we kind of were stringing you along. I don't want to waste my time. I don't want to waste their time. And so Charlie Partridge, I can't remember how long. It was like about a week or so before he gets hired. He starts looking at the film. And immediately coming out of it, when you start looking at who he is prioritizing as a recruiter, immediately we get into Abraham Cisse being a guy that became a much different target for Notre Dame. I mean, it like immediately was like, okay, they're treating this guy like he is an absolute must-get recruit, which he had not been before. And that allowed Notre Dame to kind of start a little bit more in the instance with him. And I'm going to pull up some of Abraham's film as we're talking. You were able to kind of overcome some of the, okay, why didn't you recruit me before? It's like, dude, it's a brand new staff. And they did a great job immediately with Abraham. Went out and saw him, got him on campus in the spring, and almost immediately from when they started going after him, he became a top target, but he also quickly fell in love with Notre Dame. And mom loves Notre Dame. Family's very supportive of what Notre Dame is about. Academics are very important to him and the family. Going to a place that you're going to be cared for and mentored is important to him and the family. And that's why they're super high on Marcus Freeman. But then from a Notre Dame standpoint, like, okay, that's great. You can care about academics and you care about wanting to be mentored, but can you play? And can you play at an elite level? And that's where the Notre Dame side was. Yeah, the kid fits into Notre Dame quite well as a young man, but does he fit into Notre Dame as far as what we're looking for from that elite upside edge player? And as you guys can see from the film, he absolutely does. 6'5", 225, extremely long arms, explosive off the line, smooth athlete, can develop those counter moves, plays with a great motor for a guy that's a little bit thinner. We see you'll see a play here in a little bit from his highlights where he plays tight end and he catches a fade, jump ball fade in the end zone for a touchdown. This is a big time talent. This is a number 16 player in the country, I believe, by On3. I think he's number 26 number 27 by Rival or 247 Sports. He's a big time player, Trev, and a guy that Notre Dame has set out and said, hey, you're our guy. We got to have you. And they've been in pole position for a while with him. Duke that's the catch I was talking to you about. You see that length and athleticism, but
yeah.
Notre Dame has been the leader for a while. They've been the school to beat for a while. South Carolina's tried, Duke has tried, LSU has tried. Florida State has a visit scheduled for him next weekend. They're trying. As long as this weekend goes according to plan, I really like where Notre Dame stands with Abraham Cisse and have for a while. There's been a lot out there about, LSU made a move, and then there's a lot of clickbait articles. I got someone that I know that covers LSU, and we talked before the visit. He's like, LSU is going to really try and make a move, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, okay, cool. Let me know what you hear. He texted me immediately. He's like, yeah, there was zero buzz about him from the visit. Like, they joked about, like, he just came here for the free boudin. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there was no buzz from someone who was not trying to write a clickbait article, someone who's actually trying to give me real intel. So I don't think – and then LSU went out and got KJ Green, which is a great pickup for LSU, by the way. KJ Green is an excellent prospect as well. So, once again, every time somebody takes their shot at Notre Dame, not takes their shot like they're trying to talk about Notre Dame, but like to surpass Notre Dame, there's just no movement in that regard. Now it's about, can Notre Dame make sure that they don't do anything to drop the ball or, do something to hurt themselves. Just keep reminding him why he was such a big target for you since Charlie Partridge arrived and closed the deal. It's really about closing in this instance. This is not one they're coming from behind on. This is one you're in front. Don't mess it up. Finish it out. And if you can add him to the DN class with Jackson Vaughn and Aiden O'Neal, that's every bit as good of talent as last year's class, but you got one more. And this would absolutely, without a doubt, not even close, be the best 2-year haul of defensive ends that I have seen in my lifetime as an adult or even a young man, teenager, when I was really getting into recruiting in the late 80s, early 90s, reading the old Blue and Gold Illustrated, reading what Tim and Lou were talking about and who they had on campus for the December banquets and all that kind of stuff. I've never seen Notre Dame have 2 back-to-back defensive end classes like this. If they get Abraham Cisse. If they don't get Abraham, it's still an excellent 2 years. But you could argue that the 2016 class by itself was worth 2 years of great defensive ends.
Sure.
Because you got 4 studs in one class with Julian Aguara, Khalid Kareem, Romeo Aguara, Dalen Hayes, and Adetokunbo Ogundiji. And you can say, okay, this 2 years matches that class. And that class became a focal point of a great defensive period for Notre Dame when those guys were dominating. I mean, they were a big reason why Notre Dame was so good in 2018 and 19 up front. Dalen Hayes, obviously, and Adetokunbo Ogundeji and Jameer Jones were a big part of the DN rotation in 2020 when Notre Dame went undefeated in the regular season. So we saw the impact that group had. This group would match that. If you get a fifth, and that fifth, and that's just with what they've done. Rodney Dunham, Ebenezer Utade, Jackson Vaughn, and Aiden O'Neal. It matches that group. If you get Abraham Cisse, you now have surpassed that class. And now that's where you say, okay, this is the best since insert whatever stretch of recruiting you got from Lou Holtz. And that's what's at stake with Abraham Cisse. And that's why it's so important you got to close. You get him, and you can say, I'll put Notre Dame's edge recruiting up against anybody's. You may be able to say somebody's as good. You won't be able to say somebody's better. And that's how important he is. Because Rodney, I mean, think about it. Rodney Dunham was a top 10 recruit last year. Ebenezer Utade was ranked by On3 as a top 40 recruit. You've got Abraham Cisse is a top 25 recruit. Aiden O'Neal's a top 100 recruit. And then eventually they're going to come around on Jackson Vaughn. But we know how good he is. And then you talk about, get inside. David Fuller-Runcho's visiting this weekend, is the number 9 overall player in the country at defensive tackle. Now you're recruiting defensive line the way that Bama did when they were rolling, the way that Ohio State did when they were just like, okay, replace this, first-round draft pick with that first-round draft pick, sometimes from the same family, sometimes not. Okay, yeah, they got the Bosas, but it's just Sam Hubbard and Chase Young and Jonathan Cooper. And, there was year after year after year, Ohio State was pushing out big-time edge players. Well, this is what, Bama was doing the same thing. This is what Notre Dame is starting to do if they can add Abraham Cisse to the current class, which then goes with the last class.
Without a doubt, closing on a player like this continues to close the overall gap for Notre Dame. Landing players like this will continue us having talks about Notre Dame being, one of the favorites on FanDuel to win the national title, and it'll just be reoccurring conversations. Landing a player like him also shows me that Notre Dame has arrived as a program, and it's not just crediting recruiting to just one guy. If you have the class that you landed in 2026 under Al Washington, and then you land a class like this in 2027 with Charlie Partridge, that shows me that the Notre Dame brand and the Notre Dame logo and everything that Marcus Freeman and his program have to offer, that has more of a standing than just who's doing the individual recruiting. And I think that's huge. Same could be said for Braden Parks, another player that's going to be on campus this weekend that we are extremely, extremely high on, Brian.
Yeah, and this is one that he is not as ranked as high as the recruiting services, or he's not as ranked as high by the recruiting services as I think he should be. This is a top 100 player, and this is a guy, Trev, that you and I have been talking about for a while, that I've said this is an absolute must get in the class. Notre Dame has been recruiting him for 2 years. He was one of the standouts at last year's Irish Invasion. I remember watching him and Jackson Vaughn and David Fuller-Runcho and Devin Robertson and, some of the guys, Asher Giotto, a lot of big-time players last year. Just remember, dude, there's something different about Braden Parks. This is a big-time player. This is one where you invest this much time in a guy, you want to get him. The fact that he's also from a private school in Chicago, he goes to Brother Rice, Catholic school in Chicago. He's been on campus a bunch of times. His godfather's Chris Zorch. You're like, oh, you just gotta win this one. And this has been a battle. For a long time, Notre Dame was the team to beat easily. But when Al Washington left, and then also there was a period where Braden Parks changed representation from an agent standpoint, those two things resulted in Notre Dame not being in as strong of a position as they were before. Now they're still in it, but Oregon is a major player here. But when you look at Braden Parks, Trev, he's everything that you want in an interior defensive lineman. He's big. He's already 6'3". He's about 300 pounds. He's athletic for his size. He's powerful. He's incredibly productive. He had 20-plus tackles for loss. I think he had 7.5 sacks last year as a nose 3 technique. And, oh, by the way, as you see from that clip, he also was playing with, Cam McGee, who's a 5-star recruit in the 28 class, and also playing with King Liggins at defensive tackle, who signed with Illinois. And it's a kid that Notre Dame looked at. I would have taken King Liggins if they could have got him last year. If they chose to take him last year, I'd have been happy with that. I also understood why they chose not to take King Liggins. It was kind of one of those ones. If you take him, great. If you don't, I understand, but you better do well next year.
Yeah.
and that's what they're trying to do. But even with those guys on the D line with him, Braden Parks was an incredibly productive player for Brother Rice. So like I said, over 20 tackles for loss and 7.5 sacks last year. So that's an interesting thing, Trev, is you look at him and he doesn't get sort of the preseason or the rankings hype. I mean, he's ranked well. He's a 4-star by everybody and all that, but this is a really, really dominant, in my opinion, dominant high school football player that projects to be a big-time football player as well. And by the way, in the state championship game last year, they beat St. Rita 16-0. Defense just absolutely dominated, and Braden was outstanding in that game as well. So he's a big-time talent. Now, when you talk about where things stand, this is still my favorite play, where he jumps over the offensive line and picks off the screen pass. It's my favorite Braden Parks play. But when I look at Braden Parks and where things stand, I don't feel as good about him as maybe some others do, and as high as strong as I did a couple months ago. It's back and forth between Notre Dame and Oregon. And you talk to people, Sean Davis and I have talked. Sean talks to people around him. One day it's Notre Dame, next day it's Oregon. There are certain people in his camp that are pushing for Notre Dame. There's other people in his camp that are pushing for Oregon, especially the people who put a lot more emphasis on maximizing your NIL deal as opposed to a strong NIL deal plus the right fit. So that's a bit of a battle for him as well. That makes this back and forth. The other thing I'm concerned about is even if you crush this visit, he still goes to Oregon next weekend. So you have to do so well this weekend that you not only pull ahead, but you pull ahead enough to make sure that Oregon can't win him back next weekend. And that's the challenge that's in front of Notre Dame. So that's why even if we hear how great things go this weekend, if he plans on making the Oregon trip next weekend, I'm not going to feel great about it until he announces a decision. Or like I'm told that he's made a decision that's going to be good for Notre Dame. So this is going to be a tough one, but make no mistake, there might be some that try to, well, he's not a top 100. Yes, he is. There's no spin in this one. This is a must-get recruit for Notre Dame in this class. And the other thing is he's a great fit and a great complement with David Fullarunsha, who's more of a penetrator, 3 technique, can play some 4-eye and 5 technique, disruptive athlete. Braden is pure power. And that's why those two are such an ideal fit, because they complement each other incredibly well. Not that Braden can't make plays, but he does it with power, size, brute strength. David does it with athleticism, twitchiness, and those things. So that's why I love that they're such a great compliment. Now we just got to see him close. This is a big one for Coach Partridge, who's by the way done a great job so far with defensive line recruiting. But this is just one of those ones I really hope he's able to win. And they're battling, but it's going to be an up and down couple of weeks. Obviously, the ideal situation is he commits Notre Dame this weekend and doesn't make that visit, but that would surprise me a little bit if that were to happen. Definitely surprise me.
Let's switch gears a little bit. Talk about some linebacker recruiting. And linebacker Roman Igwe-Buikwe is going to be on campus this weekend. And linebacker recruiting was in an interesting spot because, you had Max Bullough, who left to go to Michigan State. We had some questions around what was the state of recruiting like when he was getting ready to make that transition. And then Al Washington comes in and he starts remaking the board. Then he goes to the Baltimore Ravens, and then they hired Brian Jean-Marie. The recruiting board for linebacker was looking a little bare when he stepped in, and now they have an official visit all lined up with Roman, which is going to be a huge move.
It's still not a real big linebacker board, obviously, especially with Amari Irvin taking visits to other schools, and he does not, as far as I know, does not have an official visit set up with Notre Dame. That's a pretty telling sign when a committed kid is taking officials to other schools but doesn't have one set up with the school he's committed to. I think that kind of tells us a lot about where that one stands. But this is one of those recruitments, Trevor, that is going to be very interesting as far as how they close, because when to your point about when Brian Jean-Marie stepped into a barren board, there was a lot of mistakes made when it came to recruiting Roman Igwe-Buikwe, because he was a kid that had been offered already. He had visited in the fall, and when he visited in the fall, like they didn't pay that much attention, or at least the D-line or the linebacker coach didn't pay a whole lot of attention to him. They didn't show him a lot of love. They didn't really push for him. It wasn't until Brian Jean-Marie arrived that they started ramping it up. Well, there's, I think, still some wounds there that need to be healed from, because like if you're Roman and his family and his agents or whoever's around him, you're looking at it saying, okay, well, you're only coming at us this hard because you missed on this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy. You missed on Ellis McGaskin, who flipped, and you missed on this guy and this other kind of thing. But what Notre Dame has been trying to convince Roman of is like, listen, whoever that was responsible for that ain't me. If you're Brian Jean-Marie, that's not me. I'm not the one that chose this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy, and this guy over you. And now that we've missed on him, we're going for you. I can't control what they did. I'm just telling you that I've been on you since the day I was hired because I was recruiting you at Michigan, where Brian Jean-Marie came from. And so that's basically the uphill battle that Notre Dame's been fighting here. But they've been slowly plodding along and slowly climbing to get back in the mix with Roman, who also, by the way, trains with Kerry Neal and trains with Braden Parks and David Filoruncho as part of Kerry Neal's strength conditioning program that he has in Chicago. And so they went from being out to slightly having interest to, okay, I guess I'll visit again this spring, to, okay, I have a lot more interest now, to where it's like, okay, you've got to just get over that final hump for him. And that's really what Notre Dame is trying to pursue with Roman is, okay, we've slowly worked our way back up. We've slowly kind of, put ourselves in position to get back in the mix. Now it's about, do we have enough ammo? Do we have enough, pitches? Do we have whatever to kind of get over that final hump for Notre Dame to be able to say, hey, look, we've gotten to the point where we're within striking distance, and now we're going to get over the top. We're going to be able to close the deal. That's what this weekend will be about, Trev. They're clearly in a position where they think they can close. They're getting close to being in that position. Now it's about, okay, but can you actually get it done? Can you come from all the way back and get it to where you can win this battle? And honestly, they've done as well as they can up to now, but it's about the finish. And, Clemson, Indiana, I've heard Wisconsin is a bigger player than people realize. I think those are three schools. Tennessee was pushing for him for a while. I'm not sure how hard they're pushing for him anymore, but you've now got to try to get over that final hump. And how this weekend goes and some of the honest conversations that they have this weekend is going to go a long way towards determining if Notre Dame can, in fact, come all the way from behind and get this one done. It's a big one for Brian Jean-Marie, who I kind of feel bad for because, I don't know how he's perceived amongst Notre Dame fans. He hasn't got any commitments. There's a lot of things he hasn't been able to do. He hasn't been able to kind of, get anybody committed. They're going to lose Amari Irvin. There's, who knows who they're going to get in this class. And there's like, is he not a good recruiter? I'm like, no, guys, he walked into a really bad spot. As you mentioned in the intro to this conversation, Trev, he walked into a really tough spot with, two new, this is the third linebacker coach that this cycle has had to deal with.
Crazy.
And again, I don't know how much the initial guy I don't know how strong he recruited at the end of his tenure at Notre Dame. And so, I think Coach Jean-Marie has really had a hard time, just completely rebuilding the board and then overcoming some issues that happened before he even got here. The fact that you're going to get a Roman on campus, the fact that you're going to get a Caden Henderson on campus, I think says a lot. But they're putting all their chips into the Roman Caden basket right now, because basically the way I look at it is Notre Dame doesn't have a linebacker committed, and they've only got two visiting over the next 2 weeks, and they want two linebackers. Do the math, folks. This is who they want. And if you miss, it's not the end of the world. You keep recruiting. You try to flip these guys that you like, or you go find somebody new, you reevaluate or whatever. But the dream scenario for Notre Dame is that they're able to close on Roman this weekend and close on Caden next weekend which would then give Brian Jean-Marie a top guy. Here's what I was told pretty much from the beginning of Brian Jean-Marie being at Notre Dame. There were 3 linebackers on the board that he really liked, and he wanted to land those guys. And it was Caden Henderson, who visits next weekend, Roman Igwe-Buikwe, who visits this weekend, and then Noah Glover, who committed to Miami. That was the 3 that he liked. That was his top group. If we're going to land linebackers, we need to land them from that group, which is why they never made a hard push for Tate Wallace, who I think they could have got. Good linebacker, committed to Minnesota, 4-star player, and sort of like the Jacoby Clapper range of as a recruit. Good football player. They could have had a great shot to get Sean Fox, an Indianapolis kid that they went after but never pushed for. There's several other linebackers. I'm like, I think they could have got that guy, but it was really all about the guys that I needed. And then they did like Toa Satele, who was supposed to visit, but as I said before, he was never a legitimate target. And I don't know that the staff liked him as much as the other 3 guys I mentioned, because he just was never talked about. Whenever I would talk about who does Coach Jean-Marie like, it was always Caden, Roman, Noah. That was always it. Caden, Roman, Noah. That was always the conversation I had. So you still have an opportunity to land the dudes that you wanted, but you got to hit the inside straight these next couple weekends. Yeah.
Like you said, credit to Brian Jean-Marie for getting the state of the board back to where it's even at right now. Very interested to see if he can close, and I'm absolutely hoping that he can. Let's kick it back to the secondary, Brian, and talk about Greedy James, a defensive back in the 27 class, who will also be on campus this weekend. More closing to be done there as well.
Yeah, this is an interesting one. He's a Texas commit from Texas. He's from Manville, Texas. He goes to Manville High School. Plays safety in high school. Played corner this summer or this offseason in 7-on-7s. There's not a ton of film of him. There's a little bit of some highlights around, but I still haven't seen game film. A lot of my evaluation of Greedy comes from just trusting someone that I know that's seen him in person. Brian Smith has seen him in person and raved about his athleticism and his talent. And then, of course, talking to people at Notre Dame, they rave about his talent. They like him a lot. This is going to be a tougher one. There was a time that I thought Notre Dame was in a really good spot to maybe potentially flip him. I think Texas has done a good job of battling to maybe keep him in the class. That's an option now. There was a time where that wasn't even an option, or at least that was the feeling from some, that he's going to flip somewhere. Ohio State was on him. Notre Dame was on him. Notre Dame stayed on him. I don't think Ohio State did. I think Ohio State kind of moved in another direction with some different guys. And then, of course, you saw LSU get on him. Right now, it's really a 3-team battle between Texas, LSU, and Notre Dame. If I was ranking where Notre Dame stands among those 3, I think they rank 3rd. But it's close. And that's why I say this weekend's going to go a long way towards determining that. Here's what the staff likes about Greedy is the fact that he's a really dynamic athlete. That you can see on film. But I also believe that they're very high on his versatility. As I said, he plays safety in high school. He is really good on the 7-on-7 circuit, camp circuit at corner, and he could play nickel. I mean, you see on film, he can play nickel. So I think that versatility is something that I really like about his game, but you're going to get your shot this weekend to win this recruitment. And it's going to have to be, how well can you move the needle? How much can you move the needle this weekend? Can you jump on top for this kid and then stay on top? I think that's kind of where we're at with Greedy James, Trev. His real name's Cardinell. You want to talk about, can they get him? Yeah, they've got a shot to get him, but it's going to take a great weekend. And he's not a really highly ranked guy. I think only 247 ranks him as a 4-star. You can see the athleticism. I can't comment on who's right or wrong about where he's ranked, but I can say this. If Texas, LSU, and Notre Dame are all fighting hard to land you, I have a hard time believing you're a true 3-star prospect.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I just have a hard time buying into that. And so I just, yeah, I think that's it. So as I said, like, somebody in Indy M. Moore said the fact Carnell's coming back to Notre Dame means he's still interested in Notre Dame. I never said he wasn't interested. He's definitely interested. That's why he's making it official. I'm saying of the 3 schools he's interested in, I think right now Notre Dame is 3rd, but it's a close 3rd. This weekend's going to be about putting yourself in position to say, hey, we've got a shot to win this one. But you're going into the weekend knowing, I said earlier, there's some guys they have to come from behind on. This is one of them. Roman's one of them. If you're going to get them, you're going to have to come from behind to get them. But I think they have a shot. It just depends on how well this weekend goes.
Let's pivot back to the defensive line, Brian. Tyler Alexander, an interior guy, is also going to be on campus. He was a name that kind of started to come on a little bit later compared to guys like Braden Parks and David Folorunch, who I know was a target for a long time. Let's talk about Tyler Alexander and where things stand with him.
Yeah, this is an interesting one, Trev. He's another guy that Notre Dame didn't really get on until Charlie Partridge showed up. So he's done a good job of getting them involved. For a long time, Notre Dame was just battling to even get him on campus. And then he made a spring visit, and then Notre Dame became a player after that. And they've stayed on him kind of in the shadows where he doesn't get talked about as much, but he's a guy that the Notre Dame staff has been consistently going after. So I think the lack of talk about him says more about, the perception of where they stand or where he stands on their board more than it is the communication that he's had with Charlie Partridge and the Notre Dame staff, Notre Dame recruiting staff. I think there's a lot of interest in Tyler Alexander. And there's some that say, is he a guy that you're recruiting in case you miss on Braden Parks? Like, no, not really. I mean, he's a guy that you like. And no matter where he ranks in regard to Braden Parks, you're recruiting him because you like him. This is one that I don't think is going to go in Notre Dame's favor, even if they make a push this weekend. I think Georgia's well ahead of where Notre Dame is. He's from Florida. I think Georgia's ahead of where Notre Dame is. I think Texas, as of right now, is a little ahead of where Notre Dame is. I believe he still has a visit with Texas. I think that's his final visit. Just give me a second, Trev, to look that up real quick. I think that's the last visit that he has left. Give me 1 second. He'll be visiting Texas next weekend. He went to Georgia last weekend, goes to Notre Dame this week, and goes to Texas next weekend. He's another one that if I were to give my read on where they stand, I think they're third of the top three schools. It's Georgia, Texas, Notre Dame. I think they're third. But he is a kid that doesn't know as much about Notre Dame as he does those other schools. And we've seen this happen last summer during the officials where nobody thought Notre Dame was going to get Ian Premer until they did.
Sure.
And the official visit played a big role in that. And I think this is one. There was a time last year where a lot of recruiting analysts thought that Notre Dame trailed Alabama and Oklahoma for Elijah Golden. The reason I don't think that's a direct comparison, Trev, because if you remember, I didn't think they were trailing Oklahoma and Alabama.
Yeah.
They are, I think, legitimately trailing Georgia and Texas here for Tyler Alexander. But he's a big physical kid, big, strong kid. He gives them that inside plugger, run defender that they want. So the staff definitely likes him. I just think it's going to be tougher to come from behind on him the way they did on Aiden O'Neal and Abraham Cisse if they're able to get him and some of these other guys. It's going to be a tougher ask, but that's what's important to get him on the campus, because if you can't get him on campus, you have a 0% shot of getting the kid. You get him on campus, look, gives Notre Dame at least a 33% chance to get it, if not better. And Marcus Freeman has shown in his tenure that when he can get a kid on campus for an official, things change a little bit. Will it be enough to get Roman, enough to get Greedy, enough to get Tyler? I don't know. But that's what has made Notre Dame so successful the last couple of years, is they've been able to get some of those guys. And we'll see if they're able to do it with Tyler. I'm just trying to set legitimate expectations for I think they are or aren't going to get, as opposed to just pretending like, oh, they're doing great with all of them, and then trying to walk it back afterwards. Just trying to give an honest assessment to, hey, here's where things stand.
Before we talk about some of the players that are going to be coming throughout the week before next weekend's big weekend, I did have a question. Do you think that this weekend's recruiting size, like we mentioned at the start of the segment, that this is going to be a small visit? Do you think that was intentional? So a lot of focus could be on those individuals? Because, I look at the visit list for next weekend. It's guys like Richie Flanagan, who's already committed, James Halter already committed, Champ Mons already committed, Lathan Wissington already committed, things like that.
If you look at next weekend's visit, Trev, there's actually not a lot of there's actually fewer uncommitted players coming next weekend than there is this weekend. There's actually more uncommitted kids this weekend. The reason that I think this weekend was made the way that it was is because with the guys you have, it's more important that they're able to spend the staff time with those players. Cisse needs to be able to spend time with, Charlie Partridge and Marcus Freeman and Mike Martin and those guys than it is for him to get to know all the commits, which he's already done. It's imperative that Charlie Partridge is able to spend a lot of one-on-one time with Braden Parks, more so than Braden Parks being around a bunch of commits that he already knows. Now I do think David Fuller-Runcho being on campus this weekend is also intentional, because that's the one commit that you want to be around Braden, and that's a lot of the focus of this weekend. Next weekend, it's sort of a different effect. You're going to get the one-on-one time with those players, but you wanted to kind of it's the final visit. You want to get all those recruits around those guys. So why does Zayden can't? Why did now? Some of it too is Julius Jones Jr. was supposed to be here this weekend, but he chose to move it back the next weekend so he could visit the same time Zayden Gamble's visiting, who they're like really, really good friends. So there was part of that too. And then some of the guys, this was also going to be a bigger weekend where with more commits, because you also had more players that were on the board 3 weeks ago. But Notre Dame's dropped a lot of those guys. Some of those guys that they liked have committed elsewhere. Xavier Muhammad was going to be on campus this weekend. They dropped him. They were going to have Sean Fox or he dropped them after he committed to Michigan. You're going to have Sean Fox on this weekend. They dropped him. Miles McAfee was going to be on campus this weekend. They dropped him. Cade Cooper was going to be on campus this weekend. They dropped him after they got Jackson Coleman. So like that played a role as well in it. And they've also always tried to make the last weekend the one where all the commits are at as well. But this also, and some of it is you wanted Braden Parks to be here next weekend, but he chose to be here this weekend as well. And so I think the commit aspect of it as well. And then look, Trev, just before we move on too quickly, we won't spend as much time, but there's also going to be a couple midweek visitors on campus this week as well that we'll maybe talk a little bit more next Tuesday. But Marcus Fakatu visits starting, I believe, Monday, I think is when his visit starts. And then Andre Hippolyte, who's a safety from Florida, visits the middle of next week. We'll talk more about them on Tuesday, but I lump them in with this weekend because it's that next 5-6 days that have to go really well. Marcus Fakatu is a big-time prospect as well, top 50 caliber national recruit. Notre Dame is his one-time leader. They've fallen behind Ohio State. There's times they're behind Oregon, depending on which day Marcus does an interview. That's another one that it's a very important visit to be able to win there as well. And then with Andre Hippolyte, I think he's a Miami lean right now. This is hey, we're just taking our shot, and hopefully he can fall in love with Notre Dame. Notre Dame does not have a great track record of landing kids who only visit for an official. The track record is not great. So I'm not getting my hopes up too much on Andre Hippolyte, but I'm hoping he can come on campus and loves it, because I love that kid's film. I think as of right now, though, I think it's leaning towards other players or other schools for him. But,
sure.
Hey, take your shot, right? Take your shot. So that's also part of it too, is a couple guys that they wanted on campus this weekend ended up having midweek visits. So
I know we kind of talked about it already, but ideal result from this weekend. Obviously, closing is going to be the number one vocabulary word coming out of this recruiting visit weekend. But what is the ideal result here for Notre Dame?
I think in a perfect situation, you just look at the 5 on campus this weekend. You got to get 3 of them for this to be a great weekend. You've got to get Cisse. You've got to get Parks. And then if you can get one of those other honestly, if you get those 2 and that's all you get out of this weekend, it's a great weekend. So I think that's a really, really good weekend. But to me, for this to be a home run weekend to where you're putting yourself in position to land that top 2 to 3 class, you need to get at least 3. You've got to get Cisse. You've got to get Parks. And I think you've got to get Roman Igwe-Buikwe, because now you may have a great, highly ranked class, but if we're being honest, like we always say, I don't care about where it's ranked. I care about, did you meet all your needs and all this? You can come out of summer, you get Cisse, you get Parks, you get Caden Henderson, you get either Greedy James or Andre Hippolyte, or you get Albert Simeon and you get Julius Jones Jr. And that's going to be a highly ranked class. But if you don't get Braden Parks, you don't get Roman Igwe-Buikwe, yeah, it's a great class on paper, but you're missing a D tackle and you're missing a linebacker. I can actually live with only one D tackle because of how young the current roster is, but I don't want to have to, make that explanation. I think you wanted at least 2. You got to get at least 2. And same thing at linebacker. If you don't get Roman from this weekend, but you get Caden, that's a great pickup. But you got 1 linebacker. You needed 2. So that's why I say this weekend is huge. You hit 3 out of 5. But if you get like Parks and Cisse, you don't get Roman, but you get Tyler or Carnell, that's also a heck of a weekend. If you get Abraham and Roman, and then either you get Tyler Alexander instead of Braden Parks, that's a great weekend. So, but you need to get 3 for this to really be, wow, you guys crushed it. If you get 2, that's a heck of a weekend, but you're either short a D tackle or you're short a linebacker. Now you got to hope that you can get Fakatu, which right now I'm not leaning on, but you never know. That kid's so back and forth on different things. I really don't think he knows where he's wanting to go. And I don't say that as an insult. I think he's genuinely torn in different directions. So we'll see how they're able to close there. But now you put yourself in a tough spot if you can't get 3 of the guys from this weekend.
Brian, up next here on the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. We're still talking recruiting, but now we're talking about recruits that are now currently on the team. Last week, weeks, days are starting to blend together. It was either last week or earlier this week we broke down the 2023 class for seniors. Now we're going to talk about the junior class, which was the 2024 recruiting class, one that you and I believe was grossly underrated coming into college. And so the discussion is around, they've shown plenty of impactability, and they're a very underrated class. I mean, you could argue the majority of your star power on this year's football team comes from the 2024 class. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at, where they were coming out of high school, what they were as an overall class, where some individual players ranked, and talk about if they lived up to expectations, which is going to be a really fun discussion with this class. Some of it's incomplete, but man, one thing for sure is this class is absolutely loaded with talent, man. And it was severely overlooked. Severely.
It was. I mean, we had this conversation at the time. Now, like, if you're having an honest conversation about the 2024 class, we had it at the time. It was, this class has a lot of talent at the top, but there were some reaches. I was not a big fan of taking Tabron Benny Powell in the class. He lasted 2 seasons at Notre Dame, a season and a half, 2 seasons, and he's out. I liked the linebacker class, but there was some boomer bust. Bodie Cahoon was a guy with a lot of talent, but he was raw. He needed a lot to learn, and he decided to leave before he could kind of get to that point in time. I mean, you look at, Teddy Rizak. He was a guy that was a 3-star recruit with a high ceiling. It was going to take him some time. So how well this class ultimately is going to be determined by the next couple of years, not just the next season, because there were so many of those legit 3-star players that either just weren't Notre Dame caliber guys, or 3-stars that were Notre Dame caliber athletes, but one of them was a 195-pound linebacker that was just going to need time, and he was buried behind some really talented players. But yeah, I think when you look at it as a whole, Trev, when you look at the 24 class, there was a lot of that real high and some real low. There were some guys in the class that, I came around on Carson Hobbs as a senior, but wasn't in love when they first got him. I still think Carson's a talented player. He just needs more time, and he's got to focus himself up a little bit more. He was thrust on the field sooner than they hoped he would be thrust on the field last year, and he struggled, but I think that was a great portal pickup for Florida State. So there are some transfers from this class. There, Logan Thomas is always a bit of a high-ranking, high upside, but he was 205 pounds. Like, how would he fill out? So there were a lot of those type of guys in this class, but what I think the National Services missed on was just how many elite players there were in this class. And that's where I think a lot of the big misses were. This was always a class that we thought was going to add big-time star power to the Notre Dame roster. And some of those guys have done that, and some of them haven't done that yet, and we're hoping that they can. That's partly because this class is still only finished their sophomore season. But if you just look at some of the impact we've already seen, this class has already shown that their rankings were, I think, off, some by a little bit, some by a lot. I think the ultimate story on this class has yet to be written in its entirety. But we already know enough, I believe, to say I've seen 4 guys from this class so far projected to the first round of the NFL draft, and they've only finished their sophomore year. I think this class is going to be okay.
Yeah.
And that's where they missed. And this is what we talked about when we were doing our this is more looking at it from a recruiting class standpoint. The show we did pre-spring was more of a looking at their class at Notre Dame. So the senior class, which included transfers, the junior, which included transfers. This is more of a looking back at the recruiting operation. But the thing we said about this class in the spring was the senior class is going to provide the heart and soul of this team. It's where your captains are largely going to be coming from. Your team leaders are going to be coming from. you're just steady glue guys are coming from. There are playmakers, but it's the heart and soul guys, the Drake Bowens, the Adon Schulers, the guys like that. This class is where the star power comes from for this Notre Dame football team. This is where a lot of the future top 10 NFL draft picks comes from, or top 20, and that's what this class brings to the table. How well the rest of it comes along is ultimately going to tell the entire story. But at the very least, this class is going to be where a lot of your playmaking comes from in 2026 on the field.
Yeah, without a doubt, man. Let's talk about where they were ranked coming out of high school. Rivals had this class ranked as the number 9 overall in the country, as did 247 Sports. On3 wasn't as high. They had them as the 11th best class. And then ESPN coming in last had them ranked 12th. Like you said, with the amount of playmakers that are in this class, you have guys like Leonard Moore, who's shown his worth. You have CJ Carr, who was grossly underrated coming out of high school. Now he's FanDuel's favorite to win the Heisman Trophy. There's a lot of storylines like that going on in this class. And
real quick, Charlie, let me interrupt you, because I think the other interesting about this class is a class where there was a very weird difference in ranking with certain players, which I thought was really bizarre. So like CJ Carr, for example, is a consensus top 50 recruit on 3 of the 4, like 3 of them. If you could remove On3, and that's consensus top 50. So I guess consensus isn't the proper word, but a top 50 recruit by 3 of the 4 services. And then On3 has them all the way down at 232. It is very odd. You look at Keidron Young, he's ranked 79 by On3, 111 by 247, 127 by ESPN. Rivals don't even have it in their top 250. You look at Bryce Young, who was ranked number 42 by 1, number 24 by 1, number 93 by 1, and then Rivals ranks him number 221, lower than Logan Thomas. You look at Tay Johnson, who is ranked 209 by 247, 277 by ESPN, 3-star by On3, and then Rivals has him at number 90. Leonard Moore is a 3-star, 3-star, 3-star across the board by 247, by On3, and by ESPN. But yet Rivals, who wildly missed on Tay Johnson, is the only one to rank Leonard Moore as a 4-star. And I know of at least one person at Rivals, my buddy John Garcia, who advocated for him being ranked even higher. But the way Rivals does rankings, it's like the Texas guy determines where he's going to be ranked, not the entire group. And so, I think John's a big reason why he was even as a 4-star overall. But that's where you look at it, say there were some wild rankings of Notre Dame players in this group, where you're like, I don't get the wild difference between Anthony Knapp's another one. He was ranked number 97 overall by On3. Everyone else had him as a 3-star. This is the most varied ranking I have ever seen for Notre Dame class, where there just were weird outliers. Some of those weird outliers had Notre Dame guys too low. Some of them had them ranked really high, as I mentioned with like Anthony Knapp, where there was the outlier was the one that had him as a top 100 recruit. It was a very odd class, very odd class. And I think that was the interesting thing too, is I don't know that I've ever seen a group of recruits have this many guys where there was just this crazy variance with how they were ranked.
No, I think that's such a great point, man. I mean, it's wild to look at. Leonard Moore was the 228th player and a 4-star on Rivals, and then he was unranked and a 3-star by On3, 247 Sports, and ESPN.
And it gets worse. Yeah. It gets worse, Trev. It gets worse than that. Not only was he a 3-star, but if you go back and look at his rankings, On3 had him as the number 71 player in Texas. 247 had him as the number 76 player in Texas. And ESPN had the number 99 player in Texas. Even Rivals that had him as a 4-star had him as the number 38 player in Texas. Yeah.
That's a ranking bad enough to leave you speechless. I mean, that's...
Sorry, you were going to move on to something else, but I wanted to jump in there with that Leonard Moore ranking because it was even crazier. It was even crazier. I mean, how does one outlet have Tay Johnson as the number 90 player in the country, and then another outlet has Tay Johnson as a not only a 3-star, Trev, but kind of a low 3-star, like not even a borderline, ranked 3-star. I mean, On3 has him as the number 8 player in the state of Indiana. I mean, that was a wild one. Like
Yeah.
you had him as the number 3 player in the state of Indiana? That's an interesting take.
Yes.
It's a real interesting take.
No, it really is, man. I mean, how coming out of high school do you rank? How does on 3 rank Tabron Benny Powell as a 4-star and Leonard Moore as a 3-star? It's just such a disparaging gap that it's
Behind
just
Styles
crazy.
Prescott, by the way, behind Nitro Tuggle, behind Tyler Cherry, who's a backup quarterback in Indiana, behind Evan Lawrence, who's a backup offensive lineman at Indiana, behind Ian Moore, who's a nice player at Ohio State, might have a shot to start maybe, but yeah, it was. And you look at who they had him behind, you're like, dude, what? He was 2 spots ahead of a kid that went to Eastern Michigan. So yeah, it was, dude, it was wild to see where he was ranked. Absolutely wild. But he wasn't alone, Trev. That's the whole point, is he wasn't alone. CJ Carr goes from being a top 50 national recruit by all the services to, but 3 of the 4 services, to he's not even a top 10 quarterback when you look at on 3. I mean, it was bizarre. I mean, he's number 45 overall, the number 6 quarterback in the country by 247, 36 overall, number 2 quarterback by ESPN, 50 overall, number 4 quarterback by Rivals. And then on 3 has him as the number 16 quarterback and the number 4 player in the state of Michigan. And you're just like, I don't get this.
Yeah,
I don't get this.
The rankings within the class are crazy. On 3 had CJ Carr as the number 232 player in the country, and then in the same breath made Anthony Knapp the number 97 player in the country.
Mm-hmm.
It was just a very odd ranking. But we're already talking about him. Let's look at the class and go over the rankings.
Yeah.
You know, break it down and as far as top 50, top 100, and so on and so forth down the list, because that just kind of enhances the stuff that we're already talking about, man.
So when you look at it, and we'll start with the star rankings, Trev, Rivals, On 3, and 247 all had Notre Dame with 1 5-star in the class. Interestingly, it was different for each outlet. Rivals had Kingston Viliama-Asa ranked as a 5-star. On 3 had, I believe it was Gerby, right? Wasn't it Gerby Lambert as a 5-star?
Yeah.
And then 247 had Bryce Young ranked as a 5-star. ESPN had no 5-stars. ESPN did have, however, more 3-stars than anybody else other than Rivals. Rivals had Notre Dame as having 16 3-stars, so 17 of the 23 commits were 4 or 5 stars, according to Rivals. And Tay Johnson was not one of those. Or he was one of those. Leonard Moore was one of those. So they're the only ones that kind of got the 4-star part right with Leonard Moore and Tay Johnson. They had their own misses. But I would say Rivals had mistakes in this class on this guy should have been a little bit higher. Keidron Young should have been in the top 250, in my opinion. I thought that Cole Mullins should have been a 4-star. I mean, those are little nitpicks. But overall, I think from just a pure star ranking standpoint, ESPN was the closest. When you look at kind of where they ranked everybody, Trev, they had Kingston as a 5-star. They had CJ Carr top 50. They had Cam Williams top 50. They had Keidron and Aeneas both as 4-stars. They had they had the entire receiving corps as 4-stars. Cam Williams, Logan Soldate, Micah Gilbert. They had Jack Larson as a 4-star. They had all 3 offensive line commits as 3-stars, including Styles Prescott. Gerby was a top 40 player. They had Logan Thomas and Bryce Young as 4-stars. They had Bodie Cahoon as a 4-star, outside the top 250, but that's fair because Bodie was still pretty raw, but they had him as a 4-star. They had Tay as a top 100 player. Kennedy Erlach as a 4-star player. Leonard Moore as a top 4-star player. The only guy that I would argue that they missed on is, like, I would have maybe argued a little bit more vociferously, is Anthony Knapp, because I had Anthony Knapp as a 3.5-star player with a 4.5-star upside. And my argument was, if I'm doing my ranking the same as them, he should be a 4-star. Now, where he's ranked in the top 250, that's debatable. I don't know that I would not have had him as a top 100 player like On 3 did, but I would have definitely had him as a higher than a 3-star if I were to do my rankings the same way they do, which is everything is put in together. But other than that, I mean, Carson Hobbs is a 3-star. Okay. Tabron Benny Powell, Teddy Rizak, Sean Sevillano, Cole Mullins. Like, I can live with all those as 3-stars. I could. So I think Rivals was the best in regarding the evaluation of the depth of quote unquote blue chip players. I think Rivals got it right. 17 of the 23 were 3-stars, and the only one that they quote unquote missed on, in my opinion, was Anthony Knapp. but it's still a very good, 73.4% blue chip rating, I think is how they do it, right? If you're a 4 or 5 star divided by the number of commits you have in the class, I believe is how they do it. So I guess I would have had it a little bit higher, but I think they were the closest to it when it comes to just star rating. On3 had 13 players ranked as 4 or 5 stars, 10 ranked as 3 stars, which I thought was just wildly wrong. I mean, they had Bodie Cahoon as a 3-star, Tay Johnson as a 3-star, Leonard Moore as a 3-star. I just, way off on that. I still think Kennedy Urlacher is a 4-star. I think he's a guy that will do well at USC. I think, there's some, Cole Mullins I've argued before should have been, but I'm not going to, Jack Larson I thought should have been a 4-star. I wasn't going to lose my mind because then it was a 3-star. But they were there on that one. And then 247 had 13 players or 11 players as 4 or 5 stars. They had more players in the class as 3 stars than 4 or 5 stars. So without a doubt, 247 had the biggest misses. They had Styles Prescott, Anthony Knapp, Bodie Cahoon, Leonard Moore, all as 3-star players. So I think they absolutely missed the most on this class. And then ESPN had an interesting one. They had 13. They were the same as On3, 13 4 or 5-star players. All of theirs were 4. And then their 3 stars were Logan Saldate, Anthony Knapp, Bodie Cahoon, Leonard Moore, Kennedy Urlacher, guys like that I think they missed on. So I think that's where there were some consistent misses with some of these guys for them. And like they had Tay Johnson as a 4-star, but they had him too low at 277 overall. They all had Aeneas Williams as a 4-star, but only one ranked him in the top 250. I think that was a bit of a miss, but I can't argue too hard for that so far because it's projecting that Aeneas will end up being better than that. And I think he'll show that. I think him and Kedron have a shot to show that this year, but so I think overall blue chip ratio wise, I think they were off, but they weren't super, super off. As we mentioned, there was a lot of guys you're like, yeah, that's a 3-star. Right? Yes, Teddy Rizak has a lot of upside and he's very athletic, but he's a 3-star coming out of high school. That's fair. I get that one. I not losing my mind that I can't believe they had Bodie Cahoon as a 3-star. He should have not been a 3-star. And I think he's going to go to BC and have a really nice career. Notre Dame, I mean, Max Bullough was on record saying Bodie Cahoon was their best athlete at linebacker.
Yeah.
He just was raw. He played safety until his senior year of high school. So he was just still learning. So I think that was the interesting piece. I think some of the other debates were more about, okay, how was this guy that low? And then there's some guys that were ranked really high that haven't panned out yet. Cam Williams is an example of that. We'll see if he still can, but he was a guy that was ranked very high across the board, top 100 across the board, who hasn't panned out yet. So we'll see how it plays out. But top 50 rankings, they all had at least 2. Rivals had 4, and On3 or 247 had 3. So that's where On3 was 247 was very odd because they by far missed the 4 versus 3 stars, but yet they had 3 players as top 50 recruits: Bryce Young, Kingston, and CJ Carr, second most of all the services. And then they had 5 top 100 commits in the class. Trev, like that adds the top 50, but that was tied for second. They all had at least 5. On3 had 6. And then you go to top 150, 6 across the board. So like for On3, there was nobody from top 100 to 150. Nobody. For Rivals, there's only one. There's only one for 247, one for ESPN. And then top 250, Rivals had the most with 10. On3 had 9. 247 had 8. And ESPN had 7. Not rated, meaning outside the 250. Rivals had 13. On3 had 14. 247 had 15. ESPN had 16. So that's kind of how this class is evaluated from a ranking standpoint. And I think when you look at how the class has panned out, and we'll start diving into that now, Trev, it's very clear that the one complaint we had about how they were viewed is it shouldn't have been this guy's ranked as a 5-star, that guy's ranked as a 5-star. They should all be there. Not one by Rivals, one by 247, one by On3. It's like they should have all been there. And you were also missing the boat on CJ Carr, who IB had ranked as a 5-star recruit coming out of high school. So now it doesn't mean that we get them all right, because I also had Cam Williams ranked as a 5-star coming out of high school. He was actually my number 1 offensive player in that class was Cam Williams. So it was always this class was always a top heavy class, more so than 23 and some others. Because as again, on one side, you got CJ, Bryce, KVA, Tay, Cam, Gerby. The bottom, you've got Bodie, you've got, Sean Sevillano, you've got Tabron Benny Powell, you've got Carson Hobbs, you've got guys like that Teddy Rizak that were appropriately ranked as 3-star players. So there was always a bit more of that gap between the top and bottom in this class than there was in 23. 23 was a little bit more balanced in that regard, in my opinion. But I think when we look back at this, I think we're going to say, hey, you didn't have enough of these guys ranked as 5 stars like they should have been. And I would even argue that some of them are going to look back and say, hey, we probably should have had CJ Carr a little bit higher. We probably should have had Gerby. Like Gerby was an interesting too, Trev. He was ranked, 18th and 37th by On3 and Rivals, but then barely top 100 by some others, which you look back and say, you guys should have got that one right. But I also don't think that 247 and ESPN, who had him in the 80s and 90s, were necessarily wrong, because he was a very raw player still. It's like those aren't ones that I really push back and say, you guys should have. What I push back on is, okay, you had CJ 50th, you should have had him 15th. Okay, you still thought he was a heck of a player. You should have had him top 25, but instead you had him 232. Those are the ones that I really push back on.
Yeah.
I don't push back on ESPN for having Gerby 94th. Okay. I don't push back I don't even push too hard on like 247 having Tay 209th, because he did have some injuries his senior year. I think he should have been top 100. We had him as a top 100 player. But to have him 3-star, that's where the misses were. So when you say you got it wrong, if you have a guy in the top 80 and he turns out to be a star, I don't think you missed. You just didn't have him quite high enough. A top 100 player is still, if you got a guy in the top 100, you think he's really good. Maybe you just missed on quite how good he is, but I don't count that as a miss. Having Leonard Moore number 228, you might have got it right compared to everybody else. That's still way too low for where he should have been coming out of high school. And I even had him too low. I had him as a top 150 player with 4.5-star upside. And the thing we said at the time was him getting hurt his senior year kept me from being able to truly reevaluate him beyond what we saw as a junior, which was a really athletic, tall, long guy that was a bit raw as a corner. And we were too low. And we had him as a top 150 guy with top 50 upside. We were too low. What were the 3-stars that had him as a 3-star? They got him real wrong. And I think that's what this class has shown, is the star power in this class is outstanding.
Yeah, without a doubt. When I compared the two classes between 23 and 24, 23 had the higher floor, and I think 24 has a higher ceiling. And I think that's going to be reflected in how the season starts to pan out. Because I think the majority of the star power on this team is going to come from the 2024 class. When you start talking about guys that you mentioned, Leonard Moore, CJ Carr, Gerby Lambert, potentially some of the receivers. So let's dive into the impact that this class could have on the 2016. A lot of starters on offense and defense. We'll start with the offensive side of the ball first. And obviously first up is CJ Carr, Notre Dame's first returning starting quarterback since 2020, preseason Heisman favorite, the tier 1, future NFL draft pick. A lot of outlets are raving about CJ Carr. It's not bad for somebody who was the 232nd overall quarterback in the 24 class by
overall player, yeah, which was 16th overall quarterback. And On3 is still making a mistake with CJ Carr. They're still getting it wrong, because they ranked him as like the 85th best player in the country coming back in college football, behind like the kid from Cal and just some. You're like, dude, come on, because they're still basing it off of, Sam Levitt in that ranking was like the 8th best player in the country. Why? Because they had Sam Levitt as a top 100 player coming out. That's why. And they had him as the number 1 portal player. Why? Because they're still living on their recruiting rankings, even though we have evidence that your recruiting ranking is wrong. And they're still underselling CJ Carr at On3, still doing it. But it is what it is. But look, Rivals, 247, and ESPN all had CJ as a top 50 player. If he ends up being a top 5 draft pick, I'm not going to be like, you guys screwed CJ. No, they had him as if you have a top 50 player, guys, they thought CJ was really good. And I think the knock that those outlets had on CJ, which is fair for what they're doing, they're all projecting the NFL. So when they make mistakes on quarterbacks, it tends to be on the guys who aren't massive or don't have monster arms. That's when they have misses. That's how DJ Uyunglele can be the number 1 ranked quarterback in the country by these outlets. because they're betting on upside. And CJ is 6'2.5". He was 195, 200 pounds. He's accurate and smart and all that, but he doesn't have the monster bazooka, Josh Allen, Pat Mahomes type of arm. So I think top 50 was understandable for them. I had him in top 25, but I don't know how my feelings were then, but like now looking back, I don't remember being upset about those rankings other than just I think it's too low, but they still think he's very good. It's the on 3 ranking that I have a problem with. And they're still doing it. They're still missing.
Yeah,
it's frustrating.
It is absolutely frustrating. But the 2024 recruiting class is one that is going to be home to a lot of starters on the 26 team. Like I said, you got potential starters, some of the conversation, but obviously CJ Carr on offense, Aeneas Williams is assuming the RB1 role. How does it pan out with Micah Gilbert and Cam Williams will be interesting. And then obviously we know Gerby Lambert and Anthony Knapp will be in the starting lineup as well. Good chunk of your starters on offense come from this class.
And they're expected to be your 2 best linemen. That's the other thing too, is your star quarterbacks from this class. Your top 2 backs on the roster will probably be from this class. Your top 2 offensive linemen will be from this class. I think this class will ultimately – offensive class will be defined by whether or not Cam Williams, Micah Gilbert, one of those 2 can break out, or potentially both. And all 3 had very good springs. Well, 2 of the 3 had very good springs. Micah Gilbert just kind of kept doing what he's doing every spring. It's just he's now got to go show up. But I thought Cam had his best spring by far. Logan Saldate had a great spring for Notre Dame. And he's another guy that's a talented player, 4-star kid across the board. I had him as a 4-star, but he's just been buried behind other really good players. So I'm curious to see how that plays out. But I think how the receiving core develops from here on out, and then how the running backs do this season. Now, we know we expect of them. I think the running back is an little easier projection than it is for Cam or Micah, because they've got a battle to just not get passed up by Quincy Porter and Mylan Graham. Now, interestingly, Mylan Graham was also from this 24 class. He signed at Ohio State. So when we're doing sort of the epitaph of this class, or we're writing the obituary of this class, or however you want to say it, once they've, or we're writing the biography of this class, when we look back on the 24 the 24 class players, you start throwing in guys like Francis Brew is from this class, Mylan Graham is from this class. Yeah, it'll tell an even different story. But even just looking at the 24 class kids that signed out of high school, that group of receivers and the 2 running backs are gonna even jump this group up even greater. The running backs will. How the receivers do is ultimately going to tell the story of how good this offensive class is going to be for Notre Dame.
Without a doubt. It's a little bit different of a conversation on the defensive side of the ball, because we've already seen a lot of them. We've seen Bryce Young start games. We know the impact that Kingston can have. Tay Johnson did not wait long in 25 to burst onto the scene, and I'm not going to spend too much time harping on it because it's pretty self-explanatory what Leonard Moore has done up to this point. You want to talk about surpassing and blowing initial rankings out of the water. Being a unanimous All-American as a true sophomore is one heck of a way to do it. But the defense is in a little bit.
Is that pretty decent, Trev? That's okay. That's considered good.
It's not bad.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
It's pretty decent.
I mean, he didn't win the Jim Thorpe Awards. I mean, how good could he really be?
Yeah, well, that's a good point. Some have said that OJ Frederick is better, but you know what, man? But
got to get that little shot at our Miami fans in the chat, so we appreciate it.
Just had to keep everybody on their toes. But yeah, man, the story's a little bit different with the defensive side of the ball, because on offense, we are waiting for guys like Micah Gilbert and Cam Williams. There's a lot of offseason warriors on offense in the 2024 class. Yeah, Jack Larson's best spring he's had. Cam Williams, best spring he's had. Logan Saldate, best spring he's had. Whereas Tay Johnson is coming off of his best in-game season. Leonard Moore is coming off of his best in-game season. Kingston was on the verge of doing it, and then unfortunately he got hurt. So story's a little different on that
still pretty
side.
good.
Heck yeah.
In the time we saw, I mean, he finished second on the team in tackles for loss last year. He, despite being part of a very deep rotation, I think he tied for third in sacks, and he was only a half a sack behind the other. I mean, He had a heck of a year, like you said. He had a heck of a year. But then, what would his numbers have been if he'd have played the last two games? All of the last two games.
Yeah,
That's kind of where you're at. Maybe he leads the team or is second on the team in sacks if he plays against Stanford. But yeah, 7.5 tackles for loss, 3 sacks as a rotation linebacker is a pretty darn year for a kid who's part of a 5-man rotational linebacker. And we're seeing now, Pro Football Focus ranks him as the number 1 ranked returning linebacker in the country. He's getting first-round NFL draft pick projections. Athlon had him as a third-team preseason All-American, despite the fact he doesn't start. So like to your point, Trev. And then Bryce Young, as part of this conversation, he hasn't necessarily lived up to his ranking yet through freshman and sophomore year, which did not surprise us. We told people a year ago the breakout won't come till now. But he's still been a factor for Notre Dame the last 2 years. He's been a key part of the rotation the last 2 years. Who's produced, whose production is right on par, if not better, than what we saw from guys like Isaiah Foskey through 2 years, Julian Aguara through 2 years, Khalid Kareem through 2 years. I think Khalid had like 5 tackles for loss and 3 sacks and 20-some tackles through his first 2 years. He's way past where Isaiah Foskey was. He's really close to where Dalen Hayes was. He's on the same. And when I say close, I mean like they're almost identical numbers. Bryce might have an extra half a sack and then 1/2 extra tackle for loss. Like it's almost the same. And so he's on pace with the most recent stud ends. But he still played a lot is the point. It's not like he's not in the same boat as like Cam Williams, for example, so far. I love the point you're making is this group has already made a big impact where like at the productive positions where Notre Dame's impact in that class has been CJ Carr and then linemen. This one is more of like, you are seeing more of an impact from this group. And even Logan Thomas has probably played more his first 2 years than I thought he would have played his first 2 years, even with injuries. But
I would not have expected to see him on the field against Georgia in the final drive when they're trying to ice it.
Right.
I'm with you there, but those are some of the key depth players from this class. You mentioned Logan Thomas. Kedron Young is going to step up into that key role this year, coming back healthy. And then Cole Mullins, who we actually saw a little bit last year because of some of the injuries to like Gabe Rubio and Cole Mullins started to come on against Purdue last year. They're also going to play a big role. I'm excited to see what Cole Mullins does this year, man.
Yeah, same here. He's a really talented player. He's just got it. There's a lot of this on this class too. Is there's some of these guys like, hey, I like this guy, but he's got to stay healthy.
Yeah.
Like I really like Cole Mullins, but he's got to stay healthy. I really like Logan Thomas, but he's got to stay healthy. I love Kingston Williams. He's got to stay healthy. I mean, I love Tay Johnson. He's got to stay healthy. That is one thing that's been a bit of a knock on this defensive class. There's been some injuries here that you worry about them staying healthy. But I'll say this too about this defensive class, Trev. This is where On3 had their really giant misses. They had Kingston 83rd, which was by far the lowest. And I just got done saying, like, I'm not going to bang on you too much for missing, but that 83rd he jumped up late. There was a point in time where, if I remember correctly, they had him outside the top 100. They had Tay Johnson as a 3-star. They had Leonard Moore as a 3-star. And of all the 3-stars, they had him the lowest of all the other 3-star rankings for Leonard Moore. They got this class really wrong on defense, on top of the big miss for CJ. I don't know that I'd say any of the other misses were bad. And they had, and this is why I've said I don't think On3 has an anti-Notre Dame problem. They're not anti-Notre Dame because they also ranked – everybody had Anthony Knapp as a 3-star except On3 had him as a top 100 player. He was the number – Gerby was a 5-star by them. Like, I don't think they had Bryce Young in the top 50. I think they were the second highest ranking for Bryce Young. It's okay to say they're wrong. I don't push into I don't think they're anti-Notre Dame. I just think they're wrong on CJ. I don't think they're ranking CJ low because they don't like Notre Dame, because they have Anthony Knapp ranked higher. Even this is why I say their high school rankings have a big part of their say. I think that then they have Anthony Knapp as a top 25 national player, and their ranking, it was like something really high. Well, that's because they had him highly ranked coming out of high school. So they're a little bit more willing maybe to jump on the Anthony Knapp bandwagon than other people are, because it fits their narrative, because they had him ranked high, where they're just going to look for any excuse in the world not to give CJ Carr credit because they don't want to have to admit that they were wrong on him until they have to. And apparently they don't think they have to yet, which we'll see. But I think the defensive side is where they really had the bad misses in this class for on three. To your point, Trev, they had one guy in the top 50 and only two in the top 100 in this class of a group that we have seen three of them already projected to be first-round draft picks, and none of those three are Bryce Young. So
yeah,
I think you can say, yeah, they missed that one big.
Yes.
Real big.
Without a doubt. This class has also seen its fair share of transfer portal players as well. Now, if we're going strictly based on the like recruiting rankings of the players from this class, they haven't taken any of like the quote unquote big hits. Like they haven't lost out on a 4-star or a 5-star. But the players that have transferred from this class, it's Carson Hobbs, Tabron Benny Powell, Bodie Cahoon, Kennedy Urlacher transferred last year. I think there's one more too. Rezak?
No, Rezak is still the brother, the walk-on brother transferred. Teddy's still here. Teddy's who they signed.
Gotcha.
The walk-on brother is the one that left. Anthony is the one that left. But yeah, Teddy's still here. But yeah, so as you mentioned, Trev, they've lost Bodie Cahoon, who transferred to Boston College. I would argue that's the biggest loss they've had so far, him or Kennedy Urlacher. But he transferred to Boston College. You had Carson Hobbs transferred to Florida State. Tabron Benny Powell transferred to, I think, Boise. Didn't Tabron transfer to Boise State? Can you look that up for me, Trev? And so those are the early departures from the class. I think the only of the scholarship guys that have transferred out so far.
He did go to Boise State,
that's more of the level he should be at. He's a good player for that level. But you did two of the guys in that group I really think would have helped Notre Dame this year in some way. I think Bodie Cahoon and Kennedy Urlacher would have been really good special teams, just great special teams players this year. And then Bodie could have maybe put himself in position to battle for a starting job next year, depending on who all left. Like if Kingston, Drake, Jaden, and Jalen Seed all go pro, him, Madden Faremo, Thomas Davis Jr., maybe Caden Henderson, if they're able to get him, guys like that would be battling for a starting job next year. But I understand his lack of patience, and I don't know that the GM necessarily did a great job fighting to keep him here, which I think is going to be a mistake. But like they fought hard to keep Kennedy Urlacher. He saw the writing on the wall. I'm just not going to play.
Yeah,
as much as I want to at Notre Dame.
I would have been very interested to have seen what Bodie Cahoon could have done this past spring with all the injuries in the room. Like, would we have viewed him the same way that we viewed Ko Okia and Teddy Rezak? And it's like, hey, Max Bullough was talking about how he's the most athletic, physically gifted linebacker in the room, and now we're seeing it. I think that would have been very interesting.
Yeah, I would have really liked to seen Bodie get a lot of snaps this spring. That would have been very fun to see. Very fun to see. Because he's very athletic, Trev, and I think it would have been good for him to get all those reps as well.
100%.
Now he's at BC trying to battle for a spot in the class, and so we'll see how it goes. Preston Zenner was in the 23 class, correct?
Yes.
But yeah, Preston, you're going to see this year for Notre Dame. You're going to see he transferred to Rice. Bodie transferred to BC. Hopefully, we get a chance to see him a little bit this year. So there's going to be some Notre Dame kids that have transferred that they're going to get a face, which is
KK.
KK at Michigan State. Yep, that's another one. It's another one. So yeah, it's an interesting group. But yeah, this class will also have a chance to make an impact at those places.
Yep.
And I think some of these guys have a chance to be players there. I mean, we'll see about Tabron Benny Powell. I don't even know that he's a starter at Boise State. We'll see. He's a really good downhill athlete. He had a great pass breakup in the blue gold game last year, if you remember, Trev. He had a really nice, they ran a crossing route against him. He undercut it, broke it up. So, I mean, he's a good football player, but it's like, how good is he going to be in a place like Boise State? I've just never been as high on him. He's good downhill. He's smart, hard worker, but he's got really tight hips. And that's always been a little bit of my concern. You got to use him correctly. But I think if you look at Boise State, if they use him like the kid that they had last year, Ty Benefield, who transferred to LSU, correct? You use him that way, that's where Tabron can be effective. Downhill,
without a doubt.
I'm hitting a run game. That's where I think Tabron could be a pretty good football player. I think Bodie's got a chance to be in the rotation of BC this year. Will he have a shot to start? We'll see. I think he plays, and then maybe next year has a shot to start. I think Kennedy Urlacher will have a shot to play a little bit more this year for Florida State. I'm very curious. I haven't gone back and looked. Trev, have you had a chance at all to look and see how Carson did at Florida State?
I have not seen anything yet.
Okay. I haven't looked at that yet either. I'm looking at Our Lads has him as the number two nickel, but I haven't had a chance to look and see how well he did this year. So in the spring, so we'll see.
Brian, this entire conversation kind of leads us to one encompassing question. When you look at the 2024 class, have they lived up to expectations? Have they underachieved or have they overachieved based on their rankings? And this is such an interesting conversation because we have to remember that this class just finished their second year in college.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do you view this? How would you answer this question?
I think so far, even of what we just know, if we were to evaluate this not on what we think will happen, but what just has already happened, I think this class has already far outplayed its ranking. You know, when I look at this class, Trev, you have a quarterback in this class that ranked in the top 5 nationally in passer rating and yards per attempt, set a Notre Dame record in passer rating by a lot. You have a running back that's, even though he has never been a starter, was a very important piece to the 24 team that played for the title, including being the big play spark, giving them the 2 big play spark, back-to-back big play spark to get them tied up in the semifinals. Remember, coming out of the halftime, you're down 10-3. Jeremiah had 3 really good, gritty 8 to 10 yard runs, but then they motion Aeneas out. He runs a sluggo on Kobe King, beats him for a big play. Next play, they ran off mid-zone, outside zone. I can't remember which one it was. I think it might have been mid-zone. He makes a great cut, gets it inside the 5. They score a couple plays later. He was a big part of them getting that game tied back up. And he had other big plays in that game. He had, I think, like 3 or 4 catches against Indiana in the playoffs. He played a very important role as a freshman. You know, you look at the offensive line. You have 2 freshman All-Americans in 2 years from this group. Your 2 offensive linemen that have started, both were freshman All-Americans. Anthony is a true freshman. Gerby is a redshirt freshman. You know, then you look at the defensive side of the ball. Bryce Young has been a very important piece of the defensive line rotation already. Kingston's been a playmaker and a very important piece of the rotation already. Basically, he's a co-starter. Leonard Moore's the best cornerback in college football. Tay Johnson's without a doubt. You know, whenever we say this, the Miami fans get super mad. Like, I wasn't ranked, whatever. He's a top returning corner in college football. He's a preseason second-team All-American by one outlet. He's getting first-round NFL draft projection already. And, oh, by the way, also a freshman All-American. As was, I think, I don't know that Kingston was a freshman All-American. CJ was this past year. He was second-team freshman All-American. So you've already had – this class is already – and so was Leonard Moore as a true freshman. So was Anthony Knapp as a true freshman. So this class has already made their presence felt in a big way, Trev, and has already shown the kind of star power. As I mentioned, I think we've seen 3 kids from this class already projected as first-round draft picks by someone, with CJ, Tay, and Kingston. We will eventually see that with I actually have seen Anthony Knapp first-round projections as well. So 4 guys from this class. That doesn't include Gerby, and it doesn't include Bryce Young, that where if they play to their potential this year, and they're not that far from it, they're going to start getting some of that. Day 1, day 2 NFL draft projections. So I think that alone, forget the depth that this class also has. That alone, without a Cam Williams breakout, shows that this was not a number 10, a number 11, number 12 ranked class, which is what it was by, I think, 3 of the 4 services, Trev? What were the numbers? Yeah, 9 by Rivals and 247, 11 by On3, 12 by ESPN. This was not the 9th best class in the country. It wasn't at all. And if you just would have ranked CJ and Tay correctly, I think they jump up on On3. They're not the number 11 class with On3 if you rank CJ and Tay correctly. And I think if you add all the other guys, if you have Leonard Moore ranked correctly, if you have Anthony Knapp ranked correctly as a top 150 to 200, 220 player, all those type of guys, if you have all them ranked correctly, I think this is closer to top 5. I don't know that I would say guaranteed this is top 3 to 5 class, because there were so many Tabron, Benny Powells, and guys like that in the class. It was only a 23-man class. but I think it was without a doubt, it's a top 5 to 6 class already that has a chance to jump into the top 2 to 3 if we can see a Cam Williams, a Micah Gilbert, a Logan Saldate, guys like that. And even the guys that have left. If Bodie Cahoon goes and ends up being an all ACC linebacker, it's another example that this class was underrated. It may not impact the current Notre Dame team, but it's another example of that. If Kennedy Urlacher does what he does, same kind of thing, right? If Kenny Minchie goes out and balls out of Kentucky, that shows that the 23 class should have been ranked higher because that's a dude, right? You know what I mean? Like, this is a look at the class more so than just the impact they have for Notre Dame. So I think when we look back at it, it's already shown that it should have been better than it was. I don't know that it's shown it to the same degree that the 23 class has. Big reason for that is what you said, Trev. Would we feel that way about the 23 class after their second season? I would argue that even though right now the 23 class has shown itself to be even better than it was ranked than the 24 class, we're comparing 3 versus 2 seasons on campus. If you go back retroactively and look at where the 23 class was last season, going into last season, I don't think there was as many playmakers from that group than there is already from this group at the same time. So if you project forward to 2026, and we're having this conversation a year from now, I think the conversation is going to be even different. But I'm trying to be conservative and say 5 to 6 right now for sure, with a chance to be even higher. That's how I would look at this class. So I think they have certainly exceeded expectations. I would even argue that to a degree, they've slightly exceeded my expectations. Because again, I didn't have Leonard. I thought what Leonard Moore became as a freshman and sophomore is what I thought Leonard Moore had a shot to become by his junior and senior season. So I gave him a 4.5-star upside grade. So it's in that regard, I think they have slightly exceeded my expectations. I didn't know that Gerby was – Anthony Knapp certainly exceeded expectations. I think Gerby's right on track, maybe slightly exceeded expectations. There's more of – I didn't know that Aeneas is going to come in and have the impact he had as a freshman. So I think it's slightly even exceeded my expectations of how good I thought it could be, with the caveat that so far. And I think it's going to be even more so as we move forward. That's my take. Trev, what would you say your take is? I know I kind of dominated this conversation a little bit, but what is your take on on your view? Because again, when this class was being formed, you were still on the fan side of things. What is your take on where this class is now and where you think it's headed as we wrap up this segment?
Yeah, this is a very difficult question because it's very much incomplete. And I think especially for the offensive side of the ball, the story still is yet to be written, like you said at the start of the segment. There's nothing more that Leonard Moore could do next year. I'm talking next year in 2026. That would show me that he's already far surpassed what his expectations were. I mean, I guess he could go out and win the Heisman. But outside of that, I have no idea what else he could do. He's already been a unanimous All-American. He is now back-to-back the number 1 returning cornerback in all of college football, which is something that is not debatable, contrary to what some people think that it might be. In my opinion, when I look at this class, I have to separate the two between offense and defense. I think the defense has surpassed expectations when you factor in, based on the rankings, when you factor in where guys like Tay Johnson were ranked coming out of high school, Leonard Moore where he was ranked coming out of high school. There were some outlets that ranked Kingston a little bit too low. So I think as a whole, the defense surpassed expectations. Offense, I think it's a little bit different of a story. CJ surpassed expectations, especially based on his rankings. Agreed. I'm not putting too much into the running backs not producing too much because it's like when you're behind Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price, I don't care what your rankings were coming out of high school, you're just not going to play over them. You know what I mean? Barring injury. The tough part about this class.
But he did. But one did already.
What Aeneas did.
Aeneas forced his way into the third down role as a freshman that they didn't think Jeremiah or Jadarian could handle as well as Aeneas did. But right. Your overall point as the lead back is correct.
The tough part that I have on offense with this class is so far, none of your 4 pass catchers have made an impact, really. Cam Williams is yet to see the field, and he was a consensus 4-star. Micah Gilbert has struggled to stay healthy and make a consistent impact on offense, and he was a consensus 4-star. Logan Saldate is yet to make it on the field, and 3 of the 4 services ranked him as a 4-star. Jack Larson, I think, was split between 2 outlets had him as a 4-star, 2 had him as a 3-star. and he has yet to make that impact. So that's what makes this class tough for me, because it's very heavily carried on offense by CJ, Aeneas, and then Gerby and Anthony Knapp. But then on the flip side, it's like there's other highly ranked guys. So as of right now, I would view the offense as they have, as an entire offensive class, met their expectations. But this season is going to go a long way in far surpassing those. But based on what CJ is going to continue to do, what Gerby's going to do going into year 3 or year 2 in the starting lineup, what Knapp's going to do going into year 3 in the starting lineup, and whatever contributions you get from Kedron Young, Cam Williams, Micah Gilbert, Logan Saldate, players like that. So that's what makes the offensive class so tough in my eyes, because it's like the story's not done yet, but it's hard for me when the class is 50-50 as far as team impact. What do I want to weigh more? Does the impact of CJ, Gerby, and Anthony Knapp like far outweigh the lack of impact from some of the other guys? That's what makes it tough to evaluate for me. So I settled on they've met expectations with a prime opportunity to blow it out of the water in 26. That's where I'm at with the offensive class.
We had before we move on, Trev, we did have a question in the mailbag that I want to bring up here because I think it's relevant here. Tommy Guns asked, let me find his question. He asked, Brian, do you remember your 2-year grades with both sides of the 24 class? So I'm still looking for the defensive one, but I do have the offensive one that I can kind of go through, and hopefully I can find the defensive one here real quick. But look, yes, I found it. So here's the offensive one. I had and again, I think this is relevant because at the end of the day, this is why Notre Dame has been able to stack their roster the way they have and be as good as they have been. Because like you even look at a guy like a Jack Larson. I think Jack Larson has shown his ranking was good, even though he hasn't played, because what's he playing behind? He's playing behind NFL players that were ranked higher. But my 2-year grade for quarterback was an A. I graded CJ as a top 25 kid. Kenny's a top 100 kid. I think that's turned out to be a good ranking just on CJ alone. And then the potential Kenny has, that'll be defined ultimately by how well Kenny does. My running back grade was an A. I think that's a no-brainer. You have Jeremiah Love and Aeneas Williams and Kedron Young. 2 of those 3 backs have already played a key role in a team that went and played for championship.
Yep.
Jeremiah's the number 3 overall draft pick. Wide receiver, I gave it an A-. Jaden Greathouse, KK Smith, Jordan Faison, Cam Williams, Micah Gilbert, Logan Saldate. And then I did grade it at the time based on who was still left, because obviously you had Rico Flores left and Braylon James left. And there was a little bit of a projection with that group. I only had 2 guys in the top 100, so you had to look at it that way. Cam Williams and Jaden Greathouse. Looking back on it now, it's even better than that. Just on Faison and Greathouse alone, I would argue. But at least you could argue that the 23 class has been better. The 24 class is still incomplete, as you mentioned. The 23 class, I think, is what I meant to say. Tight end, I gave it a B grade. I thought Cooper Flanagan, Jack Larson were both good football players. Neither were difference makers, and so far that's turned out to be accurate. And then offensive line, I gave it an A. I mean, you had 2 top 25 recruits in Gerby Lambert and Charles Jagasol. And even though Charles has dealt with injuries, he has shown that ability when he's played. Gerby's, already freshman All-American. Anthony Knapp, I had, as I mentioned before, a 3.5-star current grade with 4.5-star upside. You had Styles Prescott, Peter Jones. I had Absher and Pendleton, both as top 200 players as well. I mean, Jagasol has started games. Pendleton has started games. Absher has started games. Otting has started games. Lambert has started games. And Knapp has started games. You've had 6 linemen from that group who have just finished their sophomore and junior seasons, have already started multiple games at Notre Dame. And I think that offensive line and has had 2 freshman All-Americans already. I think, and had Jagsall played as a freshman, he probably would have been a freshman All-American, but obviously that opportunity wasn't there. So I think offensive line has panned out. Defensive line wise, I gave the defensive line a B. Bryce was the only top 100 player I had coming out. Now, the interesting thing about it is I had 5 different players with 5-star upside based on my grading at the time. If my grading system then was what it is now, it would only been 4. I would not have given Logan Thomas a 5-star upside grade on my current grading system because I've adjusted it because I was giving too many 5 stars on the upside grade. So So I had to alter, kind of be a little stricter with some of the grading processes to try to, like there's too many guys that are getting 4.5 and 5-star upsides, and it loses some of the effect when it's that many. So I kind of tweaked it and altered it and say, okay, well, how can I, go off my gut? Do I think that's a guy's there? Why not? Then alter it a little bit that way. So Logan Thomas would not have been a 5-star upside guy based on the current grade, but he still had a very high grade. But Bryce, I feel good about having Bryce as a 5-star upside guy, Boubacar, Armel Mukum. And then the big miss for me in that class was Brennan Vernon, who I had as a top 150 recruit. And obviously he hasn't come anywhere close to that in that class. But like a lot of the other guys have, I think there's still opportunities for, Cole Mullins to show to be a top 150 recruit, and Armo Mukum and guys like that to still pan out. But linebacker, I gave it an A. I think it's a no-brainer. Jaden Ausberry, Drake Bowen, Kingston Viliamasa alone are big time. 3 of those guys I had as top 100 recruits. Jaden, Drake, and Kingston. They've all shown to be that caliber player so far. And then secondary, cornerback, A-. Leonard Moore, Christian Gray have been your starting cornerbacks the last 2 years when your team has gone 24 and 4. Guy I missed on was Micah Bell. I had him as a top 150 recruit with a very high upside, and he hasn't panned out. And I had Carson Hobbs as a top 250 recruit. I don't consider that a miss yet. He wasn't ready yet. His is more to be determined if I got, him being a top 250 player right or wrong yet. So far, not great, but I don't know the top 250 players have better shown out by 2 years, or you're not that guy.
Right.
I don't – a top 100 guy, sure, but not a top 250 guy. And then safety, I gave a B-. I love the Don. I love Tay Johnson, but there was a big drop-off between those guys and everybody else coming out of high school. So all the other guys were like borderline top 250-ish kind of guys. Tabron was not even that. So I think that has turned out to the B- grade is too low because of how good just Tay and Adon have been by themselves. But after them, it's like I think we were right on some of the lower ranking based on where those guys were. So good question, Tommy. I thought that was good to pull up here, Trev, to just kind of wrap up this part of the show with that.
Brian, up next here on the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, we are previewing Notre Dame's second opponent of the 2026 regular season, the Rice Owls. And this is a team where they've met before. I know that. Actually, I remember watching one of the games where they've met before. But Rice is one of 2 G5 teams that Notre Dame has on their schedule this year, obviously joining in with Navy. Rough season-ish last year for the Owls. The last 2 years, they've gone 9-16. They played in a bowl game last year as a 5-7 team. They lost to Texas State 41-10 in the Armed Forces Bowl. But we're talking about a head coach in Scott Abel who's going into year 2. Going to be very interesting to watch what Rice does this year because it's basically going to be a brand new looking football team.
In a lot of ways, Trev, they've had to remake their roster in a lot of ways. There's a couple of places about their roster that we like, but man, there's a lot they had to rebuild. And when you look at this Rice team, I think you start off with, you look at their 25 season, and it certainly, I would actually argue, Trev, that even though Rice wasn't good, I actually think in a lot of ways, Scott Abel showed me a little something in his first year. In that, I think his team was they weren't good. They went 5-7. They lost 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 games in the regular season were blowouts. The bowl game was a blowout. They were competitive against Florida Atlantic. They were competitive against Navy. They beat Louisiana, beat Charlotte, who wasn't very good. Beat UConn, who's pretty good. That was a good win. Beat UAB. 5-8, I actually think is slightly overachieving on what I thought maybe they were going to be last year. But again, still not good. It's still not good. Now the question is, the thing that hurt them though is because in certain areas they did perform well. They had some kids that drew some portal attention, but then they also lost some veterans to the NFL as well, or not the NFL, but graduation as well. But you look at them this year and you say, I don't know what to make of them this year because we don't know the track record for Scott Abel to be able to go out there and and rebuild a program. We don't know the answer to that. We don't know how effective he'll be at being able to go out and say, hey, look, yeah, we were down, but we went to the portal and we signed a bunch of dudes and we're going to go out there and we're going to compete for the American Conference, American Athletic Conference Championship. I don't know that we have any clue if he will or won't do that. And so I think that's where Rice in a lot of ways is a very interesting class this year, Trev, because they are a lot of portal pickups, some that I like. There's some young players that they landed that I like. There's some former, relatively highly ranked recruits that are coming in from Power 4 schools that are going to help them. We talked about Jakari Brown, even though it's spelled like Jakari, it's Jakari Brown. Thank you for that, by the way, Daily, for helping us remember that. They got Preston Zinner, a guy that you and I both like from Notre Dame. They got Jesus Machado from Houston. Like, there's some good football players coming in. What kind of impact will they be able to have? That's a big unknown. And does Scott Abel have? I think I said Abel earlier. I meant to say Scott Abel. That's my best guess at it. Does he have the ability to really get this thing going? He's a little bit of an older coach. He's coached at lower levels. He took Washington and Lee, my home state, to 3 different Division III college football playoff appearances. He went to Davidson. Led them to 3 straight college football playoff appearances, the COVID year. And then, of course, the next 2 seasons, they had winning records. And in each season at Davidson, they had a winning record. Very successful coach. And then he comes to Rice, and you're expecting him to turn it around. So we'll see if he's able to do it. But when you look at their season last year, Trev, they weren't very good on defense. But at the very least, they didn't score a lot on offense either. I mean, like honestly, like that was the thing, but they were still scrappy. Even within that, they were still scrappy, because I think what skewed those numbers a little bit is when they lost big. 61-13, 52-3, 54-26, 41-10. But then they went out and scored 37 points in a win over UConn. I mean, so like they scored, held Louisiana down and only gave up 12 points to Louisiana, who was also a bowl team last year. So there were some interesting aspects of their season. We'll see if Coach Abel can get them going. But I think when you look at the 2025 recap, the big thing for me at looking at Rice is not going to be so much what's their record this year. It's can they avoid the higher number of blowouts, be more competitive, no matter what your record is. If you're 5-7, that's fine. But can you be more competitive? That's going to be the key for Rice this year. Not in the Notre Dame game, but in the other games.
Sure. The thing that's most difficult for Scott Abel going into this year is the lack of continuity, because there were a lot of players that he had on that. I mean, yes, they were a bowl team at 5-7, but still a bowl team nonetheless, and went and played in the Armed Forces Bowl. There's a lot of players on both sides of the ball that had the opportunity to come back that transferred. You had Chase Jenkins, who was a starting quarterback last year. He's now at Kansas. Drayden Dickman, he was the team's second leading receiver. He's now at Wake Forest. Your left guard, Patrick Vallant, he transferred. And then same thing on the defensive side of the ball. They had a safety, Marcus Williams. He's now at Mississippi State. Ty Morris is a transfer at Rutgers. So
that's what I'm saying. Some of the nice things we did see from them last year, unfortunately, opened up the eyes of the Power 4 world that, hey, there's some decent players at Rice in some spots. And, it's an unfortunate thing. But I do think when you watch film, though, I was able to catch a couple Rice games last year, and they battle. I mean, they battle.
Oh, they battle. They're disciplined. They fight tough. It's just, I go back to that great analogy that you used, and I'm not willing to call Scott Abel the Gordon Ramsay of coaches, but when you have a good coach in place that runs a disciplined football team that fights hard and doesn't quit, it's tough when you don't have the ingredients. And to your point, there's so little that we know about Rice that we can't say that they don't have the ingredients. Maybe Jakari Brown is at the right spot at Rice, but everything he's done up to this point doesn't lead me to believe that he's about to turn it on with the Owls. And so that's what's so interesting about them.
Yeah. And look at the portal class they brought in. Got a Power 4 guy from, UCF, got a Power 4 guy from Virginia, running back, got a receiver from Cincinnati, Preston Zinner from Notre Dame, Jesus Machado, linebacker from Houston, Jameer Benjamin, a corner from UCLA. You got a DB from Duke, Kyron Condell. You got a DB, Caden Vermass from Nebraska. Now, not all those guys are necessarily really good players, and you probably lost as many as you gained. But there's also some good young players coming back for them as well, Trev, that I think leads to maybe some of the potential optimism. Like, maybe they could kind of get this thing turned around a little bit.
Yeah, their portal pickups are very interesting. I'll be keeping my eye out. They got in a safety from Sac State, Koa Akui. He was a very productive player last year for them. Heavy reliance on the portal, but they do have a decent foundation. To your point about some of the guys coming back, I talked about when we were making Notre Dame's all-opponent team, I took a long, hard look at their right tackle, Luke Miller, who was the lone returning offensive lineman from last season. Wide receiver Peyton Matthews comes back. He was the team's fourth leading receiver last year with 4 catches, if that gives you any sort of inclination of what the Rice pass game was looking like.
Yeah.
But the big player that I'm keeping my eye on for them is running back Quentin Jackson. He was the team's leading rusher last year, 180 attempts, 889 yards, 6 touchdowns. So be very interested to see how that dynamic with Jakari Brown goes in the backfield.
Yeah. Looking at real quick before I jump into their backfield, Trev, this is the schedule, obviously, that they play this year. I have not updated the dates. The dates are on there now. I'm actually going to pull up the other schedule that actually has the dates on it. But I think the big thing for Rice is going to be I'm curious to see how they can be this year, because I think this is going to be a little bit of a down year. In my opinion, for the American, because I think, you had a lot of their coaches left, but they don't play Memphis. They don't play Navy. They don't play South Florida this year. When you look at their schedule, they're non-conference. They've got Houston Christian, Western Michigan, and Fresno. 2 of those 3 you have a shot at. And then you're obviously, Fresno's going to be tough on the road, and then Notre Dame's going to be a loss. But, Army's at home. Army was okay last year. You get Tulane at home. Who knows how good they're going to be this year. You get Tulsa at home. They weren't very good last year. UTSA get home. They smacked you last year. So you got a long way to go there. But, it's doable. Then you play at East Carolina, who's a very good team, but lost a lot. You play at Florida Atlantic, who wasn't very good. You play at North Texas. Yeah, they were great last year, but how good's North Texas going to be this year? Their entire team left to go to play Oklahoma State, and you play at Temple, who's been a losing team for most of the recent years. So I do think there's a chance that if they can just kind of hold serve at home and maybe pull off one road upset, you're talking about a team that has an opportunity to be bowl eligible this season.
Yeah, without a doubt, one of the biggest things that benefits them, the 2 biggest names on their schedule, Tulane and North Texas, are both replacing major losses from last year, which should bode well in their favor.
Player. Yeah.
Yep. It's almost like who can win the war of attrition in the American. Yes. Like with Navy, you lose your big 3 with Horvath and Alex Teska and Eli Heidenreich. And so how can you be there with North Texas and Tulane as programs? Like, okay, you guys basically lost your teams from the 25 season. Who can survive there? And so that's what's going to be really interesting to watch this year for the American. But
yes, it is. It's going to be a very fascinating season in the American Conference. Very fascinating. Let's dive just quickly into Rice a little bit, Trev, and kind of look at some of the things we like about Rice this year. It starts with their backfield. You had mentioned him earlier. We'll talk about Jakari Brown here in a second, but getting Quentin Jackson to come back was big for them. He is a little fella. Yeah. But he is a potential impact player. Didn't do a whole lot his first 2 years, redshirted as a freshman, only had 7 carries as a sophomore. Did a little bit as a backup as a redshirt sophomore in 2024. He had 48 carries for 275 yards, 5.7 yards per carry and a touchdown as sort of a rotation role. Really broke out last year as their leading back. Had a 100-yard game against Louisiana, went for over 100 against Florida Atlantic, went for 168 in a win over UConn, and then had 16 carries for 78 yards, 4.9 a carry in the bowl win, or the bowl loss to Texas State. But yeah, he ripped UConn up in that 37-34 win over UConn, who was a 9-win team last year. He had 21 carries, 168 yards, 3 touchdowns in that game. So like a big chunk of his production last season came from there. The area where I'm surprised they don't use him more is the pass game. in that UConn game where I mentioned he had 168 yards, he also caught 3 passes for 80 yards and a touchdown. He had 4 touchdowns in that game. He only caught 4 passes all year. 3 of them were in that game for 80 yards. He finished the year with 4 catches for 76 yards, or 74 yards, because the only other catch he had was a -6-yard catch. That surprises me a little bit. That's something where I think that the coaches for Rice need to do a better job of finding ways to get Quentin Jackson the ball. But he is a shifty, good little running back. And I mean little. But he's hard to square up. He's hard to get a body on. But I think you put him now in a backfield where you've got a quarterback that's got some dynamic running ability in Ja'Carri Brown. I'm very curious to see what their run game looks like from a backfield standpoint, because Chase Jenkins, their quarterback, where did he transfer to? You said Kansas, right, Trev?
Yes, sir.
He was a very good runner last year. He had 531 yards rushing, 5 touchdowns last season in the backfield. So I'm very curious to see kind of how they're going to be able to add that. I think Ja'Carri Brown is more than capable of providing that type of running ability. And what kind of passer is he? I have doubts about Ja'Carri Brown's passing ability, but Chase Jenkins passed for 1,025 yards last year, Trev. This is basically an option team without definitely being an option team. I mean, that's pretty much what they are.
Yeah.
They're a modern, basically option team. That's what they are.
Pretty much. They're a more modernized version of what Navy runs right now. And I think Ja'Carri Brown fits right in there. I mean, the most playing time that he's really ever gotten was in 24 with UCF. Passing stats will not blow you away, but he averaged 7.6 yards per carry. He had 53 attempts for 401 yards and 4 rushing touchdowns. I mean, he's a big play guy too when he has the ball in his hands. He had a 40-yard rushing or a 40-yard rush when he was with Miami, and then a 67 and a 60 in back-to-back seasons with UCF. So an explosive guy. He has 8 rushing touchdowns on the season, or on his career, 9 picks and 6 passing touchdowns, if that gives you an idea. He also has 1 reception for 9 yards. But if it gives you the type of idea of the athlete that he is with the ball in his hands, and it's a very different dynamic. To your point, Quentin Jackson is a little dude, and Ja'Carri Brown is 6'4", 220, 230 pounds. Yeah. So that'll be a very interesting dynamic.
He has like 8 rushing touchdowns in his career, something like that as well. So, when you look at that touchdown interception ratio, he's got to learn how to throw touchdowns in the air. But he's going to a program that their quarterback last year passed for 1,000 yards.
Yeah.
Literally 1,000 yards, 1,025 yards. So if you're going to go to a place where you're an inaccurate quarterback, this is the place to go. I mean, Chase Jenkins last year completed 69.2% of his passes for 9 touchdowns and 2 picks. I think it's going to be a little bit different with Ja'Carri, but that's going to be it. So when you look at what are the strengths of this football team, I think it starts right there. Now, the thing that could kill that, Trev, is that, okay, if the offensive line's not very good, it won't matter. But I actually like their offensive line. It's not real big, but I think there's some potential there. They've got, their 2 tackles that both come back. One started, one just kind of played last year. They got a young man named Luke Needham coming back. He's a talented player. He's 6'5", 305, played some last year. They also have Luke Miller coming back, who was a starter for them for a chunk of last year. He's 6'5", about 295. And then they had a young guard, Trev, that I actually looked at as he wasn't really like in the final conversation, but he was on my early list of guards as I was going through each roster. He was the kid that I was like, okay, I'm putting this kid down as a potential, could Rice have a representative on the all conference team? Because when I looked a little bit of film, looked at some of his PFF numbers, like there was some good stuff from him last year, and he only played 7 games, but he had over 300 snaps last year, and over 100 pass snaps as a guard as a freshman. He only gave up 3 pressures all year, and there's some film to like too. So there's a chance there with this offensive line. There's some things about this group that I like on the offensive line, Trev, that if they can, I don't know how their coaching is, but I think there's certainly some tools to work with there. Obviously, if Patrick Vallant would have come back, that would have been even better, obviously. But they got Scott Becker coming in from Princeton. He was I believe, I'm going to look it up. I thought when I looked it up, Trev, that he was an all Ivy League player, but I'm not 100% sure on that. I could be confusing him with somebody else, but he was a captain last year for for Princeton as their starting center. So I'll have to look up and for sure to find if he's all Ivy League. But he was a captain for them last year. I might be confusing with someone else. But anyway, point is, you got him to transfer in. How good is he going to be? I don't know. We'll see. But I think their offensive line as a whole has a shot to be a solid group this season. It's really going to come down to the two Lukes, the tackles is going to be the key. I like them. They're good length, 6'5" each, solid bodies. They've got a shot this year. But that's going to be ultimately be the key for them is how well does their offensive line perform.
Yeah, without a doubt. Like I said, I looked at Luke Miller for a little bit when we were going through offensive tackles yesterday, and he's a good player. I'm with you. Their offensive line will be very key to their offensive success. In the same light, I think their defensive backfield is going to be the strength of their defense on that side of the ball. You look at who all they bring back, and then obviously you combine the portal acquisitions in there as well. Jarek Harper comes back. He started for him last year. And then on the back end, I mentioned the Koya Akui guy. They brought in A.J. Brown from UAB, Zach Cody from Coastal Carolina. So they made some good.
A.J. Brown played a lot for UAB. I mean, two of their best portal pickups are DBs. You mentioned the kid earlier from Sac State. A.J. Brown from UAB is considered one of their top pickups. You got a couple other Power 5 guys that, at least provide depth to their roster. And then they got a couple kids that, that played a decent amount last year that come back as well, Trev. So they did suffer a lot of losses in their secondary from who played last year. I think in some ways this is a little bit of an addition by subtraction, to be completely honest with you. I don't think they had a lot of talented DBs. A couple of the young guys that they had that were in the rotation that did have some ability are back, but they needed fresh blood in the secondary, and they got that. As you mentioned, the kid from Sac State, they got a kid from Nebraska, Duke, and then, of course, A.J. Brown from UAB, who they've played against and is a good football player. So I think their secondary should be improved. On the flip side of it, how is Jakari Brown going to be? That's really the biggest wild card for them. Can he find a comfort spot in this system where, hey, man, we don't need you to be Pat Mahomes as a passer. We just need you to be a dynamic runner and just make the layups as a passer, make the occasional play with your arm. That's a big question mark for them. How do they replace their front seven? Like, it wasn't very good, and I don't know that they necessarily loaded up with guys that excite me out of the portal the way that I do out of the secondary. Jesus Machado is an interesting one because he didn't play much at Houston last year. But if you go back and look, I think I read his last healthy season was like 2023, and he had like 90 tackles that season in this league. So he's a proven player in this league. At Tulane, I believe, is where he came from. That just was injured in 24, didn't play a lot for Houston this year. Willie Fritz thought enough of the kid to take him with him to Houston. And he got hurt in 24, didn't play a whole lot last year coming back from the injury. So he's a veteran player that's got a proven track record in this league. That if he's healthy, it's like, could he be for them what Mo Torre was, for example, for Miami? Hadn't played in a while, but he's a smart veteran player that's got a proven track record. And if we can stay healthy, can help you. I think there's some intriguing aspects there, Trev, but I don't really love what they're necessarily bringing back. Their only real pass rusher, Tony Anyanwu, is done. That's a big loss. Dylan Botts is a kid that's got a chance. There's a couple young kids that have some, maybe some potential. They had a lot of sophomores in the rotation last year, Trev. How well those guys be, but there's question marks up front. And when you're a team like this, you don't want to have question marks. And then the final piece is this is a completely brand new group of pass catchers. Completely brand new group of pass catchers.
Yeah, they basically lost the majority of their top pass catchers either to the portal or to graduation. Like I said, Peyton Matthews comes back. He was the team's fourth leading receiver with 9 catches. And it's not like I'm keeping an eye out for some of the players that they brought in the portal. Barry Jackson Jr. comes over from Cincy. Max Mosley came over from Holy Cross. And
by the way, Peyton Matthews had 9 targets. He only had 4 catches. Like, it's even worse. That's your leading returning receiver, Trev. It's even worse.
Yeah, that's not great.
They're the most talented pass catcher. Go ahead. I'm going to see if you're about to say it. Go ahead.
I'm interested to see though, and there's obviously a little bit of a bias here, but Preston Zinner might be the dude.
He's their
Like,
most athletic newcomer in the pass game, and he played defensive end for Notre Dame.
yeah.
You say bias, that's fine. But how many times the last 2 years did we say, I think Notre Dame's making a mistake not moving Preston Zinner to tight end?
Yeah,
How many times
100%.
did we say that? When he was at Notre Dame, we said, I think this kid can help you. Now he goes to a place like Rice, switches to offense, and he gets his chance to shine. He was a really good quarterback in high school. I mean, like hybrid slot, like wing tight end in high school. Would line up in the slot, and do some move around. I think he can help them. Now, the question is, it's been a while since he's played offense. So there's that transition. But I think Preston Zinner can help them. That is, to me, their best pass game pickup that they made, and this year. To be honest with you, I think he's the only one that I really feel great about. They got a kid from Cincinnati. I don't think he's really played a whole lot at Cincinnati. He had Barry Jackson. He didn't have any catches last year. He had 3 catches for 22 yards and 24, and he had 4 catches for 100 yards and 23 off the bench. So he had 1 catch for 65 yards against Eastern Kentucky. So that's a big question mark. But it's going to all be about their line and Jakari Brown being able to be a legit running weapon. That's what they're going to be. So, Trev, what do you predict for Rice in 2026?
Yeah, right now, FanDuel doesn't have any odds out for any other teams not a part of the P4, so I don't have much to reference. If I would imagine, I bet they would set their line at over under 4.5 wins, which I think is attainable. It'd be on track with what they've done the last couple of years. There's opportunities, like you mentioned, on their schedule to pick up some meaningful wins. Tulane and North Texas have been ravaged by the portal and the loss of their coaches. Chalk up the Notre Dame game to a loss. But there's going to be some interesting battles in here. Temple, Florida Atlantic, Western Michigan, Houston Christian. So I could see them going.
Sorry, go ahead. My bad.
I could see them.
Question, then I interrupted you. Don't you love it when I do that? It's like, Trev, what do you think? You start talking. Well, here's what I think. Well, hey, Brian, let me finish my point. Please continue, Trevor.
No, you're good, brother. As of right now, I would predict Rice to be about a 5-win team. That's what they've been really the last 2 seasons. They went 5-8 and 25, 4-8 and 24. Now, the caveat to that is the American was a little bit better the last 2 seasons than what I'm expecting it to be this year. I just have a lot of questions about Rice because I can sit there and talk about the questions for Navy having to replace their big 3 and North Texas and Tulane having to replace a lot of what they lost, but they do still face UTSA. They still face a couple of good East Carolina in there. So I'm going to stick with a 5-7 regular season.
I think that's the most likely scenario for them. I mean, you mentioned 2-10 Houston Christian at home. That should be a win. If you can't win that game, it's going to be a long year. You've got 4-8 Tulsa at home. You've got 7-6 Army at home. You've got to play at 4-8 Florida Atlantic, at 5-7 Temple. You get Western Michigan at home. Now, Western Michigan was a really good football team last year in the MAC, but I mean, if you're an American team, you should have at least an opportunity to beat a MAC team at home. I mean, at least an opportunity to do that. We'll kind of see how that all plays out, but I mean, that's 5 potential wins right there. Then it's like, okay, can you beat UTSA at home? UTSA was only 7-6 last year, but they beat you 61-13 last year. Can you close the gap enough with North Texas to have maybe a shot to go on the road and win that game? Those are the big question marks. But you've got at least between Houston Christian, Army, Tulane, Tulsa, UTSA, those in Western Michigan, those 6 home games, you've got to win 4 of them if you have any chance of being bowl eligible, like truly bowl eligible, not like there's not enough bowl eligible teams. So we're going to go to the next best 5-7 team like last year, where you get to that 6-6 type of thing. They're going to have to pull off a couple upsets, but if they don't, they can pull off all those upsets if they want. But if those upsets are offset by you lose at home to Tulsa, or you lose at home to UTSA or Army and Western Michigan, then your odds of making it to a bowl game for a second straight year are not going to be great. They're not going to be great. So, Trev, let's make our final prediction. Notre Dame versus Rice. What are we seeing?
I mean this with as much respect as I can to the Rice Owls. I think the score is going to be a minimum 59-3. Reason being, look, USF, Rice went on the road to USF in the final week of the regular season last year and lost 52-3. I got to believe that Notre Dame in week 2 is going to be better than what South Florida was last year, and South Florida won 52-3. So I'm giving myself a touchdown buffer there. I could see it being worse. I will never predict a shutout because that is very, very hard to do. And I also think that Marcus Freeman and this team have some demons to exercise in terms of home openers, considering the last, I mean, he's only won one home opener during his time at Notre Dame.
And that was against an FCS team.
Yeah, I would imagine there will be some demons that will be exercised. So I'm going a conservative 59-3.
I'm going 63-6, where we see that very similarly. I added 4 points to Notre Dame and 3 points to Rice. I think they'll get a couple. They'll get a big play on a blown coverage in the first home game that'll set up a field goal, and then the backups will get it in close enough to get a field goal.
Yeah,
and because I'm with you, I won't predict a shutout.
Yeah, man, I just can't. One part of me just feels like it's a little disrespectful to the other team, and two, shutting out a team is hard to do.
For Notre Dame especially, it's been hard because they take their foot off the gas a little bit late in games.
Yeah. Yep. But we view that very much the same. I'm not too concerned about Notre Dame dropping another home opener this season.
Yeah. It's not about losing. It's about how will they sleepwalk through the game, or will they come out cooking?
That will be something that I talk about the week of the Rice game. I'm not concerned at all that they lose this game, but you have a short week. You play Wisconsin on Sunday. You have a shorter week. You have a home opener. Do you sleepwalk through an opponent that you that you can beat convincingly playing your C+ game? So that'll be very interesting to watch unfold.
Yep.
Brian, to take us home today here on the Irish Breakdown podcast brought to you by FanDuel, we have a daily mailbag to get us the rest of the way. If this does happen to be your first mailbag, you can put MB for mailbag or a mailbox emoji. It lets us know to set your question aside. Super chats always get bumped up to the top. Preference of questions is to the topics that we talked about today. So the 24 recruiting class, recruiting in general with the big weekend coming up. I suppose if you have questions about Rice, you can throw those in there as well. But those questions will get preference bumped up to the top as well.
Yeah, there's one question at the top that I'm going to bring up later because I need to look back through their offer lists, but I'll get to Beezer's question here in a minute. But let's start this off with Burger King's personal chef. He changed it to Burger King's personal chef. It used to be BK's personal chef. I kind of missed that one, but yeah, we'll start things off with him.
Of all of the guys who we assume won't play starting snaps from the 24 class, who do you think has the greatest potential to contribute? Cam Williams, Logan Saldate, someone more forgotten like Jack Larson?
I think potential-wise, it's hard not to go with Cam, just because he's so talented. And we did see him start to step up and perform this year. I think as far as like the guys who assume, of all the guys we assume won't play starting snaps, Cam's in there offensively because I think we assume that Micah Gilbert is at least going to have a shot to play starting snaps. So I think Kedron Young and Aeneas Williams, I don't think qualify for this for me. Just so people are clear, well, why not Kedron? Why not? Because I assume they're going to play starter-ish snaps. Defensively, this one's a little bit different. I think the guy that I view as having the best chance to play, a lot this year, it's Logan Thomas and Cole Mullins are the two that I think have a shot. Now, I don't think he's going to play starter snaps, but I absolutely could see Sean Sevillano having a goal line short yardage role this year. We saw that a little bit in the spring. I could see something like that from him as well.
Yeah, my two picks are Cam Williams and Cole Mullins. I'm with you. Logan Thomas, it would not shock me in the slightest. But if I had to put money on it, I'd go Cam Williams and Cole Mullins. From Tommy Guns, in the current recruiting landscape, and as Notre Dame continues to stack elite talent across the board, should we expect a position or two to have a rough class every couple of years due to depth, etc.?
No, I don't think so. I don't think we should expect to have a rough year. And I guess we'd have to define what you mean by rough. If you mean like lower on numbers, yeah, that's going to happen. But as far as should there be years where Notre Dame doesn't land good football players, no, that shouldn't happen. Like, for example, you look at the linebacker class last year, Thomas Davis Jr. and Jacoby Clapper. That's not the same kind of class as what they've been landing at linebacker. There was no Drake Bone. Now, I think Thomas Davis has some upside, certainly got the DNA, but he doesn't come in as a freshman the way that Drake did, or Kingston did, or Madden even did, or even Jaden Alsbury did. He's a guy that you're like, he's going to need some time to develop. And if he does develop, his ceiling is more of a really good football player that's more in the J.D. Bertrand type of impact. It's an NFL football player. You know, the Jack Kaiser type of impact, which is, again, a really good football player, 4th-round draft pick, than it is, let's say, a Drake, Kingston, that kind of high-level, day 1, day 2 type of player. That's still a good year. It's just not an elite year. That should be the floor of what Notre Dame does at a position. That kind of thing. Or maybe there's a year that you're a little lighter on numbers, so you take a kid that, hey, look, we got young dudes. We need some guys that can come in and provide depth, give some versatility, play some special teams. There's certainly going to be years where you bring that in. And that's why I tell people, you don't look at every single kid that they recruit as if like, hey, this guy's a top 100 guy that's going to be a star. Some kids are being brought in to play different roles. And because this is a 4-year kind of player for us. So I think there's some aspects to that, Trev, that I look at and say, hey, I think you have to be willing to look at that and say there's years that maybe is a little bit more of the focus. But it should never involve, okay, we had a rough year. When you're recruiting at an elite level, you should have a rough year. And I think the 25 class had some spots where that was the case. 26 class didn't have any spots. 24 class didn't really have some spots. Maybe like the 3rd safety wasn't as good as you hoped for, but that was after they had gotten Tay and Kennedy Urlacher, 2 guys that I liked. So, yeah, that's kind of where I feel on that one, Trev.
Yeah, Notre Dame is humming on the recruiting trail. I think by position group, their down years are going to be more indicative of what's available on the board than what it is. They just have a lapse and, oh, yeah, we just forgot to recruit a defensive tackle this year, like we saw in the previous regime.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think it's going to be like how we talked about some previous linebacker class. Like, yeah, it just wasn't a great year for linebackers. So, no, they didn't go and land the day 1 starter 5-star talent because there was very few of those available in this class. So, I'm with you.
Yep. Good question.
From Jay Melvin, I asked Brian Smith this the other night. Does Elijah Golden have as high of a ceiling as the big-time defensive tackles Notre Dame is after?
Yeah. He is a 5-star upside guy for me. He's a little bit raw, but I've talked about this before. I think Elijah Golden's ceiling is very much on the same level as the David Fuller-Unshos, the Marcus Fakatus. Yeah, he needs a little bit more technical work. His body needs more work. He was 265, 270 pounds when they signed him. But as far as his upside and talent, I think he's got big-time potential. So, yeah, I do believe that. That's why I said last year's D-line class was the best they've had in how many years? I mean, that's not because of the ends, because otherwise I'd say, well, then it wasn't even as good as the 2016 class that had Julian Aguara, Dalen Hayes, Khalid Kareem, Adetokunbo Ogundiji. Yeah, you didn't sign D tackles, but you signed 4 NFL players at defensive end. It's because I think the 2 tackles, even though they didn't get the same kind of high ranking, were great players. I mean, Elijah Golden's high school numbers his last 2 years at a high level of Florida football. You know, now it wasn't like 6A public school league, but like they played the really good private schools. They beat Jacksonville Bulls in the state championship game, and Elijah went off. He had over 60 tackles for loss the last couple of years. That's insane. He had like, I'll repeat again because I love saying it. But when you just look at the dominance he had as a high school football player last year, even still as a bit of a raw player, the last 2 years, Elijah Golden had 68 tackles for loss and 27 sacks. That's pretty good. In the state title game, in the championship game, you talk about who they play. In the playoffs last year, they beat Bishop Verrat, Lakewood, Cocoa, and Jacksonville Bulls. In the state championship game, this is kind of nuts to say this. Again, this is against Jacksonville Bulls, home of Xander Edwards, home of Ashton Giotto, who's a 5-star 28 defensive end. He had 9 tackles, 5 tackles for loss, and 3 sacks in the state title game against Jacksonville Bulls.
Yeah, that ain't bad.
Yeah. Here's what he did in the playoffs. 2 tackles for loss, 3 tackles for loss, 1 tackle for loss, 1 tackle for loss in the game. They won 40-0. He didn't play a whole lot that game. And 5 tackles for loss. Sacks in the 4 playoff games. Actually, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah, in the playoff games, 1 sack, 2 sacks, no sacks, and a 40-0 win, 3 sacks. He had 6 sacks just in the postseason alone as a D tackle. He had 11 tackles for loss and 6 sacks in the playoffs alone last year. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
It's pretty good. And I love the fact that he's coached by one of my favorite recruits. I've said my whole life I still think Jared Clark could have been a pretty decent quarterback at Notre Dame. I'm going to tell you, that's one of them ones I'll take to my grave. I thought they moved him to tight end way too soon. And instead, they should have moved Matt LaVecchio to another team and still played him. But, yeah, and actually those numbers don't even fully reflect it because one of the games – no, I'm sorry. I'm incorrect. North Broward Prep was a playoff game. So in the playoffs, he had 3, 4, 5, 8, 9. He had 14 tackles for loss in the playoffs, and he had 6 sacks in the playoffs, according to Max Preps. So that's pretty good. That's pretty good.
Yeah. From Nathan Williams, how much does it affect Notre Dame and Marcus Freeman's ability to recruit these top players with the buzz every offseason with the Marcus Freeman going to the NFL? Not an issue for every player, but for the top kids.
I mean, we've talked about this. If this keeps happening every offseason, then there's going to be kids that it's going to be a problem because kids are like, hey, I love Marcus Freeman, but I'd like to play for him more than a year. I go to Notre Dame and then he leaves. I think it's certainly a problem. But let me be clear. It's not buzz that's a problem. Listen, there's buzz about top coaches going somewhere. It's the fact that Notre Dame and Marcus Freeman doesn't silence the buzz. There's been buzz the last 3 years of Dan Lanning getting another job, not the NFL, but another college job. And what happens the minute he gets out there? Dan Lanning very publicly multiple times say, I have no interest in doing that. I mean, he may be lying. I don't think he is, actually. I think he loves it at Oregon. You can coach lie and say all that. I don't want Marcus Freeman to lie. Don't think Dan Lanning's lying. Hey, I am not going anywhere. I love this job. I have one of the best jobs in college football. I have young kids. I want to raise them here. I'm not going anywhere. I think he means that because he's turned down some pretty darn good jobs to stay at Oregon. Like he has turned down interest from jobs. Like I'm not even interviewing for the job. So the buzz doesn't mean anything. The thing that affects the quote unquote buzz for Marcus Freeman is that Notre Dame doesn't squash it. And then Marcus Freeman will make comments to make it seem like, yeah, there is interest for him in going to the NFL, which bothers me. I appreciate the honesty. It's not that I want him to lie. It's that I just wish he didn't feel that way. I wish he just was like, hey, why would I ever leave Notre Dame? Now, he has said that in this season, but it'd be nice if he did that more often, to be honest with you. But, yeah, it's going to impact it. But at the end of the day, as long as he stays at Notre Dame, they'll still keep recruiting. It's a kid here, it's a kid there, but they'll just replace that kid with another good kid. That's kind of, that's pretty much how it's gone so far.
Yep. From Archer, resident Ohio State fan in the chat, how big do you expect the 2027 recruiting class to be? And what do you expect the average class size to be over the next 5 years?
I mean, Archer, I'd be an absolute moron if I tried to project the next 5 years. I don't even know what college football is going to look like in 5 years. I don't know what roster sizes are going to look like in 5 years. I don't know who Notre Dame's head coach is going to be in 5 years. I don't know who Ohio State's head coach is going to be in 5 years. I have learned a lot lately to just not even remotely put any emphasis or thought into what's going to be the case in 5 years. I don't know what recruits they're going to sign right now that are going to be on the team in 5 years. It is just not something I really care to do. So no disrespect, but I'm not even gonna try to go down that road. What I'll say is this: 27 class, I think it's going to be 23 to 25. I've said this for a long time. I got a lot of pushback on the board when I said months ago, I think this is going to be a smaller class, 23, maybe it gets to 25. They want another receiver. They need they're at 18 right now. I kind of say it's 17. I don't know that I really count Amari Irvin as a commit right now, but they want to get another receiver. They need another defensive end. They need another defensive tackle. They need 2 linebackers, and they'd like at least one more offensive lineman, Albert Simeon. That right there gets them to 23. Then if they can add another DB, that gets them to 24. And then if they can add a third defensive lineman, that gets them to 25. That's where they are. That's the sweet spot. 23, 25. That's been the case for a while. Now, could they add some guys to reclassification down the road? It's possible. Like Teddy Gerard did, but that's also going to be, that was also dependent upon the roster needs. But I think if Notre Dame has some misses, I've already talked to people like, hey, if we don't get a DB that fits what we're looking for, we have no problem going to the portal and then just having another spot in the 28 class at DB. No need to reach for a guy just to get a guy. So I think 23 to 25 is going to be the case. Overall, I mean, I'll try to respect your question, Archer. When I mean respect it, not like I disrespect your question, but like I'll try to respect it by giving an answer the best I can. I think it's going to be an average around 25-ish with the occasional class like last year that was 30, and then the occasional class that's 21, 22 because they got a lot of guys coming back. And they had a lot of success like we saw this year at the portal. So I think around 25 on average will be where they are.
Yeah, I think
over a
4-year
span, that's 100 players plus some will leave, and then you'll get portal guys. So yeah, it's about where I think that they'll be. Yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
All right, here is the one from Beezer from earlier. I think I have a decent answer for this one now, but I got at least a couple guys that I could mention here for this. I just had to see. I mean, 24 recruiting class doesn't seem like it was that long ago, but then it also kind of was. You know what I mean? Like a little while ago. So I will do my best to answer that. And I think I have a few options that will be good ones.
From Beezer 12, Washingbeard, who is a recruit from the 2024 class who wish Notre Dame landed that would complement this team? In contrast, are there any you're happy didn't commit to Notre Dame?
If you could go back and do it all over again, I mean, a guy that I would have liked would have been Eli Bowen, because that would have meant that you also had Peyton Bowen. So I guess that would have, would have maybe been nice to have. But, looking back on it, some guys that I wish they would have landed. I really like the Nnamdi Agboko kid that went to Georgia. I think he was like a big 6'4", 340-pound kid that I think is just a better prospect than guys like Sean Sevillano and Davion Dixon. And then maybe if you get him, maybe you get his brother Emeka in this class, in the 27 class at offensive tackle. Who knows if you had a shot there. He was one that I liked. I would have really liked to have gotten Elijah Rushing in that class. I was very high on Elijah Rushing. I think he was a really good football player. He would have been a guy that I would have liked to have had in the class for sure. Some others, Jalen McClain was a guy that Notre Dame liked a lot. I know Archer in the chat would like that. But the big one for me is I just wish a couple of the guys that they lost would have stayed. That'd have been a big one for me. And the guys that I mentioned, as I would have liked, those are guys that are more so guys that they had a shot with. I mean, obviously I would have loved if Jeremiah Smith, you know what I mean? Like realistically of guys they had a shot with, those are the guys that I would have really liked to see them have landed in that class. Here's one on offense. I really wish that Emmett Mosley had any interest in Notre Dame. And he didn't. He's a good football player. He could have helped Notre Dame a lot. I think he could help. Now, again, stay healthy, but you'd got him, then you got his brother. They were really good players. And I love when, children of alums come back to Notre Dame. And his thing is his dad and his mom played at Notre Dame. His mom was a great soccer player. His mom was actually a better college athlete than the dad was, from what I've read. But I don't know that the dad loved his Notre Dame experience, and his kids, I don't know that they necessarily grew up with wonderful stories about the greatness of Notre Dame, because the two older brothers had zero interest. Emmett and Trent had like almost zero interest in Notre Dame. And early on, I was like, oh, they're going to get that kid. Just didn't pan out that way. But that would be those would be some. I mean, I love their running back class. At receiver, I mean, other than, hey, I wish you would have got Jeremiah Smith. I think Ryan Wingo would have been a very interesting player for Notre Dame. That's another receiver that I think realistically they had a shot at. Not a great one, but had a shot at that I think could have been impactful. I think having him grooming under Bo Collins and then Malachi Fields the last 2 years would have been fun to watch. And then now what can he do now that he goes into his junior year? That would have been another one. But overall, there weren't a lot of, man, I wish they would have got that guy. Looking back, there were guys at the time that I liked that they didn't get, but so far those guys haven't panned out. I really like Caleb Brewer coming out of high school. He hasn't done anything at Penn State yet. I like Davis Andrews as a potential depth safety and who could play special teams. He hasn't done a whole lot. I think those are all things that that I point to and say I think that'd have been fun to see how some of those guys could have developed at Notre Dame.
Only one from the 24 class that I could think of, and I don't even know if Notre Dame, because I wasn't as in tune at it, obviously, at this time. If Marquise Lightfoot would have came to Notre Dame in that class with Bryce Young and Logan Thomas, he would have been in a spot this season where he could have still been in like that rotational, key rotational role. He's one.
Yep. The some people might point to Justin Scott. I don't know that that's one that was ever going to work out. And then that was the issue with Marquise Lightfoot, Trev, is he was a good prospect. He was never interested in Notre Dame, and I don't know that the fit for Notre Dame would have been great, which is partly why he ended up where he did. So
fair enough.
Yeah.
From Jay Melvin, Brian, if Ohio State pulls it off and lands Marcus Fakatu, do you pair with DJ Jacobs? How good of a D-line class would they have?
It's a very good class. It's a little top heavy, in my opinion. I think there's a couple other kids in that class that that they would need. That's just one D tackle. I think they'd need another D tackle in the class. And then the other thing is they're kind of telling Marcus Fakatu, you're going to be an end. Okay, if you're playing him end, who are you going to have a defensive tackle in that class? They've got another kid that's highly ranked in that class, kid named Wyatt Smith from St. Thomas Aquinas. Notre Dame offered him, and it went nowhere. There just wasn't a lot of interest by Notre Dame. I think he's a little overrated. I had no one outlet as him a top 100 player. I don't see it. I think he's a borderline 4-star player. But when you've got those two studs at the top, that's a strong finish. To me, the class is ultimately going to be defined on how good it is by what else do you land on the defensive line. There's some other players they need to add because, as we've said with Notre Dame, if you just get two studs on your defensive line, well, that's great, but you've got to start 4. What else do you have? And that would be my kind of question mark. But, man, it's good luck finding a team that's got 2 better on the D line than that. There aren't many. One of them that would be Notre Dame if they can land Abraham Cisse, because your top guys are 9 and 16, whereas when you look at Ohio State, DJ Jacobs, I believe, is a top 10 overall recruit. I believe he should be anyway. He should be a top 10 recruit. Yeah, he's number 12 by Rivals on 3. And then Marcus Fakatu is ranked, I think, in the 50s, 56 by Rivals on 3. Well, Notre Dame's group would be number 9, David Fuller-Runshow, and number 16, Abraham Cisse. So Notre Dame would have a better 1-2 punch, but Notre Dame would then have Jackson Vaughn, Aiden O'Neal, and then, Braden Parks or whoever else they get. So that's why Ohio State would have a great 1-2 punch. I'm not super high on Wyatt Smith, but it's what do they do along with that will define that class. And that's going to be the big key for Ohio State. I'm not worried about Ohio State recruiting D-line. They're going to have a good D-line class. They're not going to be done. I can't tell you that I'm super familiar with their board to know who the other guys are on the board, but I know that there's other defensive linemen they're going after. It's just going to depend on how they close. But it's got to be more than just those 2. That's a great 1-2 punch, but what else do you have? That would be the question mark. But Notre Dame's 1-2 punch would be even better than that if they get Cisse.
Sure. From Archer, speaking of Ohio State people, once this class is complete, what position do you think is the most important for the 28 class?
It's a great question.
Off the top of my head, I would go with linebacker.
Yeah. Linebacker and safety are the top 2 for me. I'm back and forth on which one, because you're going to have to rebuild your safety room in the next couple classes.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, you only have 2 pure safeties signed in the last 2 classes combined. Now, I think John Gay can play safety. I think Nick Reddish could help you there, but They were both recruited to play nickel first and safety second.
Yeah.
So Zayden Gamble and Joey O'Brien are it. Now, those are two really good players, but okay, that's just two players. Even if they both pan out and are as good as we think they can be, who's your number two? Who's your backups at those positions? So I think safety is a big one for me. Linebacker's a huge one. Even if they get Roman and Caden Henderson, I still think that linebacker is very important. Defensive end is very important, not from the standpoint, or defensive line is important, not from the standpoint of they haven't done well there, but it's such a good year in the North, getting that third class in a row. I think continuing to receiver is another one. Can you go out and get a couple dudes next year? And I think another important one next year is tight end. I think it's a great year at tight end in the North. I mean, Matt Bowen, Theo Schott, Trey Euler, Jack McNamara. It's some really good Northern tight ends. I think that's another position that I look at and say, it's super important that you do well there next year. Super important you do well there next year. But I think linebacker, safety are probably at the top of my board. And then tight end be my top one on offense.
Yeah. Another one from Archer. IB, if you were to make a big board of recruits, who is at the top?
So it's a group of guys. If I'm looking at the 27 class, it's, Cisse, it's Caden Henderson, it's Braden Parks, it's Julius Jones Jr., and it's Albert Simeon. Would of the guys that are left, that's the group. Those are the needle movers. Those are the gap closers. Those are the game changers. However you want to sign it, those are those guys. And I think you the more of those guys you can get, the better this class is going to be. If I look at the current class, who are my block of top players? Like, this is the best of the best in the class. It's Champ Mons, who is wildly underrated. He's a stud. It's Lathan Wissington. It's, Olu Olubabola. It's, I think James Holter's in the conversation. David Fuller-Runshow, Jackson Vaughn, and Zay Hassan and Zayden Gamble are probably like the guys that I'm like, that's my group that's the best of the best. There's some other good players in there, but that's the top group of like, these are the real needle movers that also have high floors. That's where I would be with that group.
From Tommy Guns, what is the biggest conundrum Notre Dame can find itself in with the 2024 class?
You miss out on Henderson and Igwe-Buikwe. That's it. That's the problem. And if you don't get Julius Jones Jr., which I'm just saying hypothetically, it's quite a conundrum you find yourself in a receiver because you don't have a board anymore. I mean, Sonny Gales is on the board, but right now I don't think Notre Dame's his leader, so there'd be work to do. But I think not getting those two linebackers would be not good. Yeah. Not good.
Another one, T Guns. Which currently on-campus recruiting class is the best based on floor and ceiling prior to post-portal departures and arrivals? And has there been any change in how you thought they'd shake out?
No, I think when we've talked, I think the last two classes we've talked about, Trev, the ones that we have more than a year of data on, I think we're what we thought they were going to be. For the most part, I've said 24 slightly exceeded expectations. 23 has met my expectations. I don't know that either have gone way past or have been below, but that's also probably because we had them ranked a lot higher than everybody else did.
Sure.
The of those classes on campus, the one with the highest floor was 23. The one with the highest ceiling was 24.
Mm-hmm.
The ones we've broken down so far. 25 was, I would argue, Marcus Freeman's worst class. The reason I don't include 26 in that is because it's hard to compare that class to, from the guys we've seen so much of. But it was the highest ranked class of the four by me, not by me. I know it's also ranked by others, by me, because it combines 23 and 24. That's what made that class so good. It has the depth of 23, but the high impact talent of 24. And that's what makes the 26 class so good. If they finish the way I think they're going to finish, I think the 2-year grade for 26 and 27 will be significantly better everywhere than it was in 23 and 24. Where 23 and 24, I mean, you had the running back grade was elite, the receiver grade was pretty good, quarterback grade was elite. Like, there was a linebacker. Good luck having a better 2-year stretch at linebacker than the stretch where you got Jaden Alsbury, Drake Bowen, Kingston, Drake. I mean, that was pretty good. But there was also some guys in there. You're like, yeah, you're rebuilding the roster. With these type of guys. These are depth guys. These are special teams guys. Where now you're not bringing in as many of those guys, and you're bringing just as many, if not more, elite players if they finish the way we think they can finish. And that's where, as good as those two classes were, these next two have way more opportunities, but it's just kind of hard to compare them to current groups. But if you go on it from a high school ranking standpoint, I think the 26 class has an even higher ceiling than the 24 class.
Agreed.
Just nuts to say. Absolutely nuts to say. Yeah.
Little quote, making of the sausage question here. How much film do each of you think you watch on a weekly basis?
Well, some weeks I don't watch any because we're so busy doing other things. But when I'm high school film and when I'm watching Notre Dame film, I'll watch sometimes up to as much as 4 or 5 hours a day between mostly game film and high school film as well. But like right now, I haven't watched a ton of film. Right now, I'm probably about a half hour to an hour per day because most of the kids that we're looking at are guys we already know. We've already broken down their film. Sometimes I like to get refreshers. There's been a couple new offers on the table that I've gone back and looked at, but it just depends on the time of year, Tommy. It's not like 5 hours a day, 24/7, 365 I'm watching film, or I'm watching film 365 days a year there's sometimes I don't watch any film, and then there's other time that I watch 4 or 5 hours a day minimum, and then during the season there's days where I'll spend 6-7 hours watching film because I'm breaking down the Notre Dame game and watching the opponent film and stuff like that. But it just depends on the time of the year.
Yeah, in season it definitely ramps up. Right now, maybe 30 to 45 minutes a day. But in season, I'm probably doing 10 to 15 hours a week between Notre Dame's opponent film, their previous game film, all that stuff.
A good one. Here we go from ND Wine and Cheese.
What is the biggest recruiting bust since 2000, however you want to define it?
Biggest bust? Oh my gosh. I don't know why people like to have the negative focus questions, but since 2000,
I mean,
that's a lot of dudes. I have to recollect who Notre Dame signed in 2002 and oh my gosh, I'm trying to think of some of the guys back then. I mean, there's been some guys that have been. I have to continue to say that Josh Barajas is still one of the biggest busts Notre Dame's had. I mean, that wasn't related to injury. Just like, wow, that guy was just really not that good, and I thought he was going to be good. But man, I'll tell you what, Indy Wine and Cheese, this would be a great message board question because then I could spend the time researching. Like, you're asking me we're on the 2027 class. You're asking me to think through 27 classes in 27 years to think back through who that would be. I can't even. Josh Barajas is one that always comes to mind. There was a guy, Travis Lightco. I don't even remember if he's in the 2000s or not, that I thought was going to be really good. He didn't do a whole lot. I think Freddie Parrish, was a highly ranked guy. I don't remember him doing a whole lot. So I'd have to go through and look, man. I'd have to go through all the classes. This would be a great message board question. I'll tell you one receiver that I thought was going to be a really good player and ended up not doing anything. I really liked DJ Horde coming out of high school. Jordan Johnson was a huge bust. He was recent. Yeah, but there was another kid from the same high school, DJ Horde, that Notre Dame got that played as a freshman that I thought was going to be a good player, and he ended up not doing a whole lot. I don't remember what he was ranked coming out of high school, but he would be one that pops off.
Shaq Evans at Notre Dame.
Shaq ended up being not at Notre Dame, but he ended up going. He only played a year at Notre Dame. He ended up going to UCLA and being a pretty good player, and got drafted. But yeah, he didn't do a whole lot at Notre Dame.
I mean, a lot of my
that's one.
A lot of my thought process goes to quarterbacks. And like for one reason or another, whether it's, bad coaching or whatever. I mean, dude, by how I was talking about him when he was coming up through high school and then when he got to Notre Dame, I would have thought Phil Dracovic was going to be Joe Burrow before Joe Burrow happened.
Yeah.
And like that was rough.
And a lot of that's on Brian Kelly. Part of that's on Phil as well, but he was really good. I don't even consider him he was a guy that at one point in time after his 1 year at BC was getting first round NFL draft pick projections, but yeah, he ended up not being able to live up to the those expectations. And I think part of that, his tenure, I think him and Dane Chris were the two guys that I felt got ruined the most by Brian Kelly. It was frustrating. Very frustrating. Yep.
From Salty, Oklahoma is building a very strong recruiting class, top heavy with talent. What has changed for them?
Well, number one, on-field success helps. I mean, they were a playoff team this past year. And number two, I mean, that you're going to recruit well at running back. You just hired Dylan McCullough. But I think a little over a year ago now, they hired Jim Nagy as their GM, and he then brought in Lake Dawson, former Notre Dame player, to be one of their player personnel guys, who was, I think, an assistant GM, something like that in the NFL. And that group of, that recruiting staff that they've brought in has been super impactful. They're doing a great job with the NIL stuff. They're doing a great job with talent and evaluation. The staff is got some quality recruiters on staff, and then they've put a good product on the field this past year. So I think those are the big factors in it. But bringing in Jim Nagy and Lake Dawson as GM and personnel side has been a monster impact for Oklahoma.
Yeah,
monster impact. We've had Jim on our show before. We had him on our show talking about the Senior Bowl a few years ago. And obviously, Lake Dawson is a former Notre Dame player. Yep.
Miami is recruiting nationally while at the same time keeping top Florida talent home. The prior regime neglected homegrown talent. Did you see this coming?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons you brought in Mario Cristobal. The only question with Mario was would he be able to coach well enough to win? There was never a question of would Mario be able to recruit, and would Mario, a Miami native who played at Miami, focus on recruiting Miami players? Well, yeah, that we saw coming. What we didn't know was how successful it would be. We knew they would prioritize it. We also knew that a guy that coached at Alabama and Oregon was going to take advantage of the connections he had made in other areas, and Miami used to do that well. But it was also, you knew they were going to prioritize homegrown talent. Like that's partly why you bring back Mario, who was always a great recruiter. I think the question was more so, would he be a good enough coach to really get them in title contention? And I think that's still a bit of a question mark for him, like it is Marcus Freeman, because doing it once in 4 years doesn't mean that you've returned the program to glory. I think this is a big year for both Mario and Marcus Freeman to prove that, hey, we aren't just one-hit wonders. Like, we're that team. And their records the last 2 years are almost identical. I mean, Miami's 24-5, Notre Dame's 24-4. No, Miami is what they did go. They went 13-3 last year. So Miami is 23-6. Notre Dame is 24-4. Because Miami actually played their bowl game 2 years ago and went 10-3. But like regular season plus playoffs, Miami's 23-5 and Notre Dame's 24-4. So very similar. Both have made it to the national championship game. It's can you do it again? That's the big question for both of them. But recruiting was never a question mark for Mario Cristobal.
Agreed.
And prioritizing homegrown talent was never a question.
From Connor Patton, how does the Notre Dame decommit rate compare with other programs these days?
It's still one of the best. I think they've lost 2 decommitments in this class. I know they lost Ellis McGaskin, and I think they're going to lose. They lost Khalil Terry, although that was a mutual parting of ways, and then they lost. They're going to lose Amari Irvin. So 3, and they didn't lose any last year. 3 in 2 years is a great success rate for decommitments.
Yeah, having the number 1 overall class in 2026 with 0 decommitments is just crazy.
Yeah, and that was not repeatable. You're not going to have that very often. But Notre Dame has had a very low decommitment rate in the last couple of years, and it will continue. It was a bigger issue before because they couldn't compete with the big boys for the big time. Once Alabama got involved with Keon, it was going to be tough, and Ohio State got involved with him. And, we know the whole deal with Peyton Bowen, but I think Peyton Bowen's recruitment would have been very different now than it would have then because Notre Dame would have said, okay, fine, here's what we have to offer. So I think it would have been a lot different, I should say.
From Salty, Georgia is not ranked in the top 10 recruiting classes and is losing Georgia linemen and skill talent to out-of-state teams. What do they need to change?
Well, number one, I don't get too worried about Georgia until signing day. And I would just tell some of these people that have landed players from Georgia, ink isn't dried yet. And matter of fact, hasn't even signed. The reality is this: Kirby is Dabo gets a lot of flack for NIL and how he handles it, but Georgia has a very similar problem. They don't have a lot of money, and they're not able to win a lot of these bidding wars for players. Not a lot of them. They can win a battle here and there, but they don't have the money to throw around like Notre Dame does, like Texas does, like LSU does, is even willing to do. And then Kirby refuses to kind of do that in certain instances. He doesn't want to do that, which I can respect. But like Marcus Freeman, like Ryan Day, you've got to find that sweet spot between the two.
Yep.
And I don't know that he's necessarily doing that. I also don't think that Georgia is not the same program they were a couple years ago. I mean, if you think about it, this 27 class, they were in middle school when Georgia last won the national title. Well, it's 2022. This is the 27 class. We're going to the 26th season. Those were middle schoolers. And when was the last time Georgia won a big game, a big playoff game? Last time Georgia won a playoff game was 2024 or 2022. They're over in the playoffs last couple of years. So they're not that same hot program that they were before. And now that NIL's a thing, they're getting hurt because that $10,000 under the table payment to Uncle Curly doesn't go as far now when Notre Dame can say, I don't care about paying Uncle Curly. Here's a $250,000 per year offer that we're going to give you legally. And they can't compete with some of that stuff. And Kirby doesn't like doing some of that stuff. So even though Dabo gets ripped for it all the time, Kirby's a lot closer to Dabo than he is Steve Sarkisian. A whole lot closer to Dabo than he is Sark and Mike Elko.
Yeah.
And you may not like it, but the reality is there's a way to buy players that you're getting the right kind of players. I think Ohio State is doing a good job of that. Notre Dame is doing a good job of that. Indiana clearly did a good job of that. I mean, there's a right way and a wrong way to do it, and Kirby's got to find that sweet spot in a way that is going to allow them to be successful. That I just think they need to figure some stuff out. That's going to be a big part of that.
Yeah,
he's going to have to figure that out. So, yeah, it's a good one. Here's one from ND Milton fan.
Which game do you think Coach Marcus Freeman wants a mulligan on?
I mean, he'd probably tell you Ohio State, the title game. It's probably what he'd tell you. I think there's two Ohio State games that come to mind, the title game last year and then the 23 game. And then there's obviously the Stanford 22, Marshall 22 would probably be in there. I think Clemson 23 would be a big one for Marcus Freeman as well. That season looks a lot different if you ended it. You won every single game after the Louisville game. You won ran the table. Yeah, that'd have been a very interesting one.
Yep, agreed. The bright side is the list is short. At least there's not a laundry list of games that we have to go through to be like, mulligan on that one and that
especially
one.
Especially the last couple of years. I don't know that Northern Illinois he'd won a mulligan on. I think that loss, as much as we hated it, and I don't want to say it's a good thing it happened. I'm not saying any of that. It was miserable. It was miserable then. It's miserable now to think about. But looking back on it, the culture of that team dramatically changed because of that loss.
Oh, yeah. You got him to take every opponent seriously. You had a 6-year senior admit that he didn't even know what Northern Illinois was. Right. Yes, it changed the culture of that team for the better, for sure.
Yes. Here's a good one.
Brian, I wasn't around at Irish Breakdown in 2024. Didn't you say that the 24 recruiting class would win a national championship at Notre Dame and was a top 5 class?
Well, I didn't say that the 24 class would win one because I don't think one class does it. But what I said when that class signed is that Notre Dame's going to win a championship in the next 3 years. I did say it was a top 5 class. Yes. And I still, like I said earlier, I think it's right now, it's 5 to 6 right now. I think it's proven to be that. and there's potential for it to be even better. But so I said both of those things, but I didn't say it that they were going to win and the 24 class is going to win. It was more of the after the two classes together and seeing what Marcus Freeman was doing from a recruiting standpoint, seeing what he was doing from a portal standpoint, it was like, okay, this class is going to be really good. Because you got to remember, when this class signed, it was right around when they also got like Riley Leonard out of the portal.
Yeah.
You know, this class signed in December around, I think it was a couple days later, you had Riley Leonard committed to Notre Dame, and we knew they were going to get him. We already knew that he was going to come to Notre Dame. So when you're seeing all this, you're like, dude, this program's going to win a championship. When you look at the last couple classes combined with what they're doing in the portal, and a lot of it wasn't necessarily the 24 class per se, but it was you finally went out and got a quarterback through the portal, and then a quarterback in high school that you saw. There's going to be two quarterbacks on the roster next year that can lead you to a championship. Riley, the portal, and CJ in high school. It was a big part of it, but the 24 class would have been a big part of it, but it wasn't. They weren't going to go out there and win a title. This was sort of the final piece of the puzzle to me saying, I think this roster is going to be as good as anybody in college football. That's what it was. But it wasn't independently of itself. It was with the knowledge of what they had already done in 23 combined with what they were doing in 2024.
Yep.
So that's where it came from. So Salty says, which offensive skill position player for Rice would you rate most highly, and would he excel at Notre Dame? Quentin Jackson is an easy answer, Trev, but the reality is there's nobody at Rice that's going to play for Notre Dame, including Quentin Jackson. He comes to Notre Dame and he's their sixth running back right now.
Yeah,
I mean, about that.
Yeah, it goes back to what we talked about earlier. Preston Zinner enters Rice's depth chart as probably their most physically gifted pass catcher, and Notre Dame didn't even switch him to tight end. I mean, it's different levels.
Yeah.
From Tommy Gunn. So in terms of the O-line should eat, as you said yesterday, I believe, which holiday meal is Rice serving up to both Notre Dame Lions?
I don't even know what this means, Tommy. What is rice? I mean, rice isn't, I've never had an appetizer for Thanksgiving dinner or holiday meals. So what would be a nice appetizer before the main course and on a holiday meal?
I mean, I'm a big deviled eggs guy.
Okay, there we go. Deviled eggs. Let's do it. Deviled eggs. You can devour them a bunch at a time. They're easy to consume, and they're setting the stage for what's to come. I think it's a pretty good analogy, don't you, Trev? That's a good one. Deviled eggs. I like that.
Thank you.
I like that. Yeah, that's good. That's very good.
From Salty, Alabama's recruiting class is not ranked in the top 50. 50. What is happening with Alabama?
They're a portal-driven team that is going to have a bunch of kids commit here over the next couple weeks. That's what's going on at Alabama. You got to understand, Salty, not everybody recruits at the same timeline, or not everybody recruits in the same number of players. Notre Dame is a high school-driven team. The teams like Oklahoma, Notre Dame, Ohio State that are still high school-driven are always going to rank higher than teams like Alabama under Kalen DeBoer. Now, I don't know that I agree with that, but also I keep telling you guys, these schools that were rich when they could cheat are not rich now. Because back then you could pay a kid, and like I said, this isn't even an example. You could pay an uncle $5 to $10,000 to influence his nephew, and it was going to go a lot longer than you do that now. And the nephew should be like, pass, because Alabama's still $250,000 short of what Georgia's offering or what LSU's offering. That's a part of it as well. But he's got to win now, and that's portal. That's going to the portal and filling up that way. I also think Alabama has had a couple pretty good and big classes under Kalen DeBoer already that I think they're not necessarily looking for a giant class this year. So the reality is we've got to stop looking at recruiting rankings annually the same way that we have in the past. Mm-hmm. You know, last year Alabama signed 27 high school kids and landed 17 transfers. It's a different animal than what they did before. The year before that, they signed 21 high school kids and 13 transfers. You know, I mean, and they're going to still end up signing a good chunk of kids. And then they've had some misses as well, but they'll end up being fine. I don't really care where they're ranked in June 11th because they're recruiting differently than Notre Dame.
Yeah. 6 months away from the finish line. It's a long way to go.
Yep.
Kentucky has the number 14 recruiting class. They are getting guys from Georgia and Florida. Will this continue, or is it a first-year flash?
It's a first-year flash, of course. That's easy. But will it continue? Well, that depends on how well they do on the field. And what I mean by that is the boosters aren't going to spend money on a losing football team. They're willing to spend money in year one on a new coach that's got some buzz. Fine. If you go 3-9 next year, I don't know that I'm going to be as willing in a year or two if you keep doing what Mark Stoops did the last couple of years to spend that same amount of money. Now, if he goes out there and puts together an 8-9 win season here over the next year or two, hey, I'm investing. I'll be willing to keep investing in football. And then new donors show up. New people are willing to give to the collective, things like that, especially if Mark Pope keeps not being good at basketball. You know, now that they'll do it. So, yeah. That's it depends on how they play.
Yep, 100%. Cal has a number 14 recruiting class. Their new head coach was the DC at Oregon for 4 years and recruiter of the year while with Alabama. Is Cal about to rise like Stanford when they were good?
No, because Stanford didn't rise because they were great recruiters. They rose because they were great coaches and developers. And I don't know that Tosh is that. And it's going to be just like Kentucky. Does he go win this year? Does he win next year? If he wins, then they have a shot to be pretty good in the ACC. I mean, Cal's a place like Stanford that if they get run correctly, could rise up quickly up the ACC. It's an easy league to go up if you're from the bottom. Now, you're not going to get in the same levels like, Miami. Maybe you don't get to Louisville or Florida State when they're good, but you could certainly pass up teams like Wake Forest, Duke, Virginia regularly. Like the ACC's added some really dynamic recruiters the last year or two, which is going to help that league. Getting James Franklin, getting Tosh is, but can you coach? That's the big question that we're going to have about Tosh. You can recruit, but it's like what we talked about in Kentucky. If you don't win, though, the donors aren't going to be willing to spend that money again to pay for another 4-8, 5-7 football team.
UCLA and USC are essentially tied with the number 10 and 11 recruiting classes. In 3 years, which team will be better?
If they have the same head football coaches right now, UCLA. But what I predict is that it'll be USC because Lincoln Riley's going to fail again this year. He's either going to leave on his own or they're going to force him out in the next year or two, and then they're going to hire a real coach, and they're going to get better. And then Bob Chesney's going to do a real good job in the next couple of years, 2 to 3 years, and then somebody even bigger goes out and gets him. So that's why I'm going USC.
Yeah,
I did there, Trev.
I do. I also think it will be USC.
Yep.
Well, folks, that's going to do it for us here today on the Irish Breakdown Podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. There is also a mailbag going on tonight on the IB Nation Sports Beat Show. It goes live here a little bit less than an hour at 5:05 p.m. Be sure to turn into them. Then, in case you guys haven't gotten enough mailbag action, Brian will be back tomorrow with a Friday free-for-all mailbag. I got the day off. I'm going to a wedding tomorrow. Friday weddings are always interesting, but excited to see how that goes. On your way out of this show, be sure to hit that
for
like.
Now, I'm going to do mailbag for now. It's tentative. Got a couple of things kind of going, but it's tentative. But yes.
Well, there we go.
Yeah.
All the more reason to be subscribed to this channel and have that notification bell hit. And an even bigger reason that you guys should be premium message board subscribers at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So, folks, enjoy the rest of your evening. Until next time, that's Brian. I'm Trevor. See you back here very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.